declare the meeting open, members, and remind members that committee meetings will be held in public session are recorded, and all electronic devices, with the exception of the new committee tablets, interfere with recording equipment in the committee rooms, even in the silent mode. So can advise members to switch off their mobile phones and any other electronic devices, with the exception of their new tablets. Today's business, the committee will receive 3 briefings today. Firstly, we have the Minister and senior officials to discuss the budget allocations of 2015-16. We will then receive a briefing on the safety barrier replacement policy, and this is a follow-up to a briefing on the same subject on the 18th of February 2015. Finally, we will receive a presentation from QPANI in relation to the structural maintenance budget for 2015-16. The committee also has a large volume of subordinate legislation to consider today. Agenda item number 1, apologies. So we have apologies so far recorded from Steve, and other than that, I think we've a full house. So, agenda item number 3 is the draft minutes. The meeting on the 4th of March. Can I refer members to page 6 of their packs in relation to the meeting on the 4th of March, and ask members to agree these minutes so they can approve and sign. Agreed? Can I refer members to the tabled packs for the committee meeting that took place on the 23rd of March. Can I ask members to agree these minutes are approved? Yep. Okay, that was emergency meeting. Agenda number 4 is correspondence. Refer members to page 12 of their pack, their tabled pack. Can inform members that unless they have any objections or issues to raise, those items that have been marked with suggestions of approach to note shall simply be noted. Can I ask the clerk to go through the key correspondence?
Thanks, Chair. Item 1 is correspondence from the Committee for Finance and Personnel regarding the Civil Service Voluntary Exit Scheme. Item 2 is correspondence from the Department regarding an appointment to the Transport Holding Company Board. Item 5 is correspondence from the Department regarding a public consultation on TransLink integrated ticketing system. Item 8 is correspondence from TransLink regarding the launch of public consultation on Ulster Bus services. Item 9 is correspondence from the Consumer Council regarding that public consultation. Table correspondence, there's correspondence from the Minister regarding the power report. There's table correspondence from the Department regarding the public passenger transport service agreements and service permits regulations. Members may remember from this that also contained the proposed 10-year contract for TransLink. The Department is now proposing that this would be no more than 8 years, which would bring it into line with other European transport provision. There's table correspondence from the Department regarding the committee queries on the Ulster Bus Town services. There's also correspondence from Ballymoley Borough Council to the Minister regarding community transport issues.
Okay, are members content to note the items marked accordingly? Indeed. Okay, great. Are members content to forward the correspondence from the Ballymoley Borough Council to the Department for comment?
Yep.
I presume we'll get that back?
Yes.
Okay. Agenda item number 5, the ministerial briefing on budget allocations for 2015.
Chairperson, is there any more detail on the appointment to the Northern Ireland Transport Holding Company, or is that coming up again?
Maybe if Paul could speak to that. Sorry, what was it? Any more correspondence?
Appointment to the Northern Ireland Transport Holding Company.
No.
You mentioned it there in the correspondence.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there was. It was about the appointment of a board member to the holding company board for a short period. I think it was for an additional 6 months until such times as the competition to replace board members has been run.
Just on that, I mean, is that an extended term then?
I have no idea.
It is an extension, yes.
We could maybe talk to the Minister on that, possibly. So, agenda item number 5 is the ministerial briefing on the budget allocations. Can I refer members to page 74 of their pack and welcome the Minister and his officials. I don't believe we probably need any introductions. We've been here before. So, the floor is yours, Minister, and if you want to make a...
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman and members of the committee. I welcome this opportunity to speak to the committee. You will know Andrew Murray Peter May, Permanent Secretary, and John McNeill from our Finance section. Welcome the opportunity to speak to the committee and clarify my department's position with regard to the allocations provided through the 2015-16 budget process and the implications for the programmes and services supported by that budget. Key issue that I want to address is the view that my department has only a reduction in its resource budget of 0.6%, and as such is one of the least affected departments in the 2015-16 budget. I have to say this is totally misleading and unrepresentative of the real impact on my department's budget. In reality, my department is facing cuts and pressures of some £60 million on my resource budget, which is around 18% of the 2014-15 baseline. The scale of pressures facing my department was highlighted in a briefing provided to the committee on the 27th of November and highlighted at the committee's meeting with my senior management team on the 3rd of December. Indeed, at a subsequent meeting in December, Clark and researchers were provided with a detailed explanation as to how those pressures were derived. The situation in 2015-16 has in no small part been exacerbated by severe funding constraints this year. And in addition to the £15 million reductions to meet the Executive's cuts, the 4% cuts, funding has not been provided to meet the £20 million pressure in respect of the release of value from Belfast Harbour Commissioners. Funding reductions both this year and next have forced me to take some very difficult decisions, particularly around service delivery. And let me say, this is not a case of me playing politics. The actions that I've taken are entirely necessary. They're driven by available resources. However, where there is potential to impact on public safety, it is my duty as a Minister to highlight this, and frankly, I make no apology for that. Indeed, I have taken the decision this year, 2014-15, to continue to deliver what I consider to be basic safety-related services, such as the gridding of roads, even though, as a result, it is highly likely that the Department will overspend. So, in terms of next year, I've been working intensively with officials to determine how best to spend the limited resources that are available to me to provide the key water, transport and road services. These are services, Chairman, that, and this committee will know, that the population of Northern Ireland relies on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. However, the scale of the reduction required means that serious impacts on core services cannot be avoided. I've sought to maintain as far as possible the services that NI Water and TransLink provide, but in doing so, both are still taking significant to their budget. However, even with these cuts, I've still had to move money from roads to NI Water because the company would have not been able to meet its basic legal and licence obligations otherwise. It might be useful, Chairman, for me to take each of the functions within my department and highlight the likely impacts as a consequence of the budget allocations, starting with NI Water. NI Water is subject to independent assessment by the utility regulator. The regulator's final determination recommended a resource DEL allocation of £113.9 million for 2015-16. That represents the regulator's judgment as to the greatest level of efficiency Northern Ireland Water can deliver. At the draft budget stage, the proposed allocation was some £15 million short against the regulator's assessment, mainly due to a massive increase in rates revaluation. Now, Northern Ireland Water is subject to significant statutory duties as a company and a water and sewage undertaker. It is also to certify to the regulator that it has sufficient funding to carry out its regulated activities. The draft budget allocation would have made it virtually impossible for the company to comply with its legal duties and obligations under the licence, and to enable NI Water to meet its legal obligations, I have significantly addressed the shortfall through the allocation of a further £10 million, bringing its resource allocation to 109.2 for 25-16. thus reducing the shortfall to some €5 million. I anticipate that the additional resource funding will go a long way towards enabling NI Water to mitigate against any significant deterioration in water quality or wastewater compliance, which appeared to be inevitable at draft budget stage. But a significant risk remains. Northern Ireland Water is still €5 million short of the budget cover recommended by the utility regulator and was therefore unable to accept the final determination. It will need to absorb this shortfall, and there is no funding to cover unforeseen events. My department will be making robust bids for funding to the Executive through the 2015-16 monitoring rounds in order to mitigate against potential negative impacts on customer service, such as the incidence of low pressure, supply interruptions, pollution incidents and out-of-sewer flooding. Northern Ireland Water and the utility regulator are still engaging in order to review the required output targets within the PC15 business plan, given the level of funding. I believe that NI Water, working closely with the regulator, my department and other stakeholders, will continue to provide sustainable, high-quality water and sewage services to the public. In terms of TransLink, the draft budget left them facing pressures of some €15 million. As you are aware, an additional €2 million was provided to TransLink at the final budget for town services. TransLink are undertaking a number of further actions in order to reduce their funding pressures. These include efficiency staff reductions of some €2.1 million, targeted at non-frontline staff, and service review and reorganisation savings of £5 million. Now, although the network will continue to operate on its current geographical basis, it is inevitable, given the funding constraints, that there will be reductions in frequency, and I stress frequency, to some services. However, in taking forward any proposed service rationalisation, TransLink will consult with passengers, local community representatives, politicians and other stakeholders. TransLink's proposals for 2015-16 mean it is now projecting a loss of €10.8 million. This, on top of a projected £14 million loss for 14-15, is the reason TransLink needs to make savings to secure its long-term future. As the committee will be aware, the Chief Executive, David Strahan, has expressed his concern in respect of this issue. And turning now to Transport NI, as a consequence of addressing pressures in Northern Ireland Water, further reductions are required from Transport NI. And the Transport NI budget has limited room for flexibility. After taking into account inescapable costs totalling almost €84 million, including €40 million for PPP commitments, together with staff costs of some €61 million, Transport NI has only €13 million to cover all remaining activities. These include street lighting and traffic signal energy, funding for external contractors, including those who normally repair traffic signals and street lights, supplies including patching materials and salt, fleet maintenance and fuel, and indeed the €13 million will only cover the street lighting and traffic signal energy costs and inspections. The cost of all of these services is normally over €40 million. The annual cost of street lighting and traffic signal energy alone is over €11 million. A further €2 million is required to meet legal obligations associated with the inspection and testing of street lighting installations. So as a result, I will be unable to utilise external contractors to carry out routine maintenance work and street lighting repairs in 2015-16. The stopping of these activities is likely to have serious public safety implications. In addition, around 500 industrial staff employed by my department would be confined to depots with no work due to the budget position, and this situation would be totally unacceptable. I am therefore proposing to allow my industrial staff to provide a skeleton routine maintenance service until the outcome of June monitoring is known. Let me make it clear that this will be done at risk. and I will be keeping the position under careful review. In terms of community and rural transport services, Chairman, in view of the severe budget outcome, I've been forced to reduce funding to community and rural transport providers by some £2 million. I do think there is scope for greater efficiencies in this area while still protecting the service to the most vulnerable. My department will actively facilitate discussions with the service providers to assist in this process, and to that end officials met the organisations concerned on the 11th and 12th of March. In terms of wider departmental reductions, the frontline business areas where I have pursued reductions in costs and other efficiencies, I've already secured a £2 million reduction in administration costs to help offset funding pressures. This year, my department is planning on a further £3 million reduction in staffing and other administration costs in 2015-16, including savings associated with some 225 staff leaving through the voluntary exit scheme. Chairman, I hope that I have enlightened the committee as to the real consequences for my department. It's not a case of 0.6% cut to my department's funding, as was said in the budget document, but cuts which are considerably more substantial, with potentially devastating impacts on the key public services that my department provides. I'm happy to engage in questions and wider discussion, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I know you've went at pains to try and explain that it's not a 0.6%, and maybe that's, if I look at your own document, maybe for the record, for those who are listening, the opening budget was £344 million for 2014-15, and your opening budget for this year is £33 million. So that's a reduction of £11 million in most simplistic terms. Yep. Your headline, whenever you need to grab the headline, you referred to 60 million. That certainly doesn't reflect in that piece of paper or that document that your department have forwarded us today. And I suppose if I want to touch on some other areas in relation to that, you reduced the level of funding to TransLink, but they've increased their income by 4 million. So if you want to just keep the mathematical equation going, that's reduced that deficit to 7 million. And then there's you said reorganisation within the TransLink of another 5 million reduces the deficit to 2 million. So you do paint a very gloomy picture. I'm not entirely sure who is the mathematician in the department, but the sums don't actually add up. I do appreciate you did give me time to come and meet you one day, which you didn't actually give me access to that document. I hope my voice holds out here. Now that I have sight of it, the figures are there, and maybe if you could speak to that, Minister, maybe to see where this gap of the 60 million that you've cited versus your paper that certainly in the first initial look only looks at 11 million.
Let me say that there is no attempt on my behalf to falsify or to shroud wave or to make a situation worse than it actually is. Right? And so I'm going to ask Peter to take through again the 60 million, if you like, because that seems to be the dispute between the committee and ourselves in reconciling the 0.8 against the 60 million. So,
but before Peter speaks, I mean, there shouldn't be a dispute, Minister. The facts are the facts. You've presented, your department's presented a paper today in terms of your opening budget in both years, and there's a difference of 11 million. You did, in terms of your 60 million, when you did make your statement, you talked about pressures. We wouldn't like to think you're carrying forward pressures from previous years and trying to bring them into the mathematical equation, but I'm happy to hear what Peter says on that.
Okay.
I mean, it is quite complicated, and there are two ways of approaching this. The draft budget document set out how we arrived at a figure of £65 million of cuts and pressures at page 8 of that document. That was the subject of the briefing we did in November, and then we had a subsequent briefing with the clerk and some of his specialist officials. But if we try to compare, as you've started to, Mr. Chairman, the total budget this year with last year, let me try to explain how we arrive at the figure of around 60 million pounds. You've already highlighted that the final budget for 14-15 was 344 million. Normally, in that year, we received £6 million extra under an income heading for car parking charges. Now that...
Sorry, can I just stop you? I've actually written that down, but I want to address that one now. That £7 million come up in this committee, and whenever we were doing the inquiry, I've since spoke to the new Mid-Ulster Council, where they've said now clarification has come to say it's actually not worth £7 million, it's considerably less. So maybe, can you speak to that, Peter, or who from it?
I'm not sure the precise point. The point is that we,
well, no,
the 6
sorry,
million I was raising...
Sorry, the point is, you've used a figure of 7 million in terms of a pressure, but now as the councils go forward and before they sign documents, certainly when speaking to the Mid-Ulster Chief Executive, he said what the £7 million that was cited to them is no longer £7 million, it's considerably less. So if you take that equation, Peter, whilst you're using £7 million as a pressure, if that amount of money is not as much as 7 million, then it's not £7 million of pressures that the department's suffering. So maybe you could explain where the difference and how that has arisen, given this committee had an inquiry into the car parks and that sort of inquiry, we've done that piece of work in a fairly rushed time. Maybe we shouldn't have rushed it when we see it now, given what some of the councils are coming telling us. But certainly the figures that were supplied, which indicates in terms of the pressure you're talking about, was 7 million. Now the councils are combining saying it's much less. So maybe just address that point before you continue, Peter.
I was talking about the £6 million that the department receives in income from car parks each year. That £6 million will not be received as income next year because the car parks would have been transferred to local councils. As a result, DFP included that £6 million into our baseline budget of 333. So whereas this year we had 344 plus 6, which is 350, we only have 333, including the 6 next year. So that's 6 million additional. That takes you up to 17 million of the total. In addition, the Minister has mentioned that the budget this year it's not been possible for the department to live within its budget. It's likely that the department will overspend by around £13 million because of the delivery of essential services such as winter gritting and so on. That £13 million of additional cost takes you up to £30 million. In order to make savings this year, we took a number of one-off steps that cannot be repeated. So we took £14 million of one-off measures, including taking £10 million from TransLink, in terms of reducing the amount of funding they were given, by essentially reducing their reserves, which is a point that the committee has made on a number of points. So that 14 million takes you up to 44 million, if my maths are correct. And the pressure that we referred to is the one that the Minister mentioned around Northern Ireland Water. Northern Ireland Water faced a £13 million additional rates bill this year compared to last year as a result of a rates revaluation. And that was reflected in the determination that the utility regulator reached. So that takes you up to 57 million now with roundings and some smaller items. That's the essential difference, but that's where we've arrived at the £60 million figure. And what I would stress, as the Minister has, is that we have taken a series of measures to try to reduce that scale of that pressure. It is just that we cannot see a way of meeting all of the pressure without making the cuts that the Minister has referred to this stage.
And I mean, you're going to pains to get to the 60 million figure again, Peter, but you still haven't explained why the 7 million that you're describing as a pressure to car parks isn't 7 million, it's considerably less.
No, I've explained I think clearly, because the 6 million...
Okay,
well, let me try again. Yeah. The £6 million of income that we receive every year under a separate income line for the department, we're not receiving that £6 million. That's a matter of fact that we can demonstrate that we get the £6 million, and we're not getting that next year. And that is not, there's not 6 million extra being put into our budget because of that.
Nor are you incurring any costs. So the 6 million is the income, that doesn't allow for costs. So let's look at what your balance sheet would say at the end of the day, and that's where you've got your 7 million initially, and it's no longer 7 million. Wouldn't that be right?
No, the car parking charges and the contracts, we still run those contracts and we still pay for them. I don't know, John, whether you can say anything.
So out of the £7 million that you're not bringing in, are you going to continue the maintenance of the car parks?
The £6 million I'm talking about is the income from car parks. Yeah. That is an income number that is lost to us.
Not the last 2 years.
Now, we continue, I believe it's that we continue to hold the contract for the car parking. I don't know, Andrew, if you can fill in the detail on that.
Yes, we're running the contract on behalf of councils, so that will be on a rechargeable basis. I think, Chairman,
What are you going to get for that?
our costs will be
But how
retired.
much are your costs?
I don't have that figure with me. We can provide that in writing.
You don't have that figure with you?
No, not the cost for each individual council.
Overall cost. There's a global cost to doing that. I didn't know that.
Yes, our global cost is a mixture of the on-street parking enforcement and off-street and on-street parking
So
enforcement.
you're saying, Andrew, you haven't done a calculation
Oh, the
for separating
yes,
the two?
of course, the calculation has been done. We have
Yeah.
told councils what that would be.
So
We have
tell
offered
us
that
what it
service to the councils.
Could you tell us what it is, Andrew?
No, I don't have
There's
it.
the total for car parking enforcement and car parking service contracts is £9.3 million. And that was set out in the draft budget document on page 17 of the draft budget.
So you're still receiving that?
No, that's the amount we pay
What do you pay?
for the contract, and that's the amount we will recoup from councils on a direct repayment recharging basis.
So in other words, we're not making money out of it.
No,
But you're not losing money either.
Well, we're providing the service, but we're not making,
we're not
we're not
getting-
net
not getting the
benefactors.
income.
That's very good business, must say.
Okay, go ahead, Peter. Was it, sorry?
Well, that,
Well, I think I got to the point of it,
That
trying
was
to
it.
explain the £60 million.
okay.
You also mentioned an issue around TransLink. I don't know if you wanted me to...
Well, I suppose going forward, I mean, TransLink, once you starve some of the funding from them, their reorganisation in terms of the Minister's comments brings them an additional 5 million, and there's a 4 million increase in fares. So that actually does away with the 10 million that you didn't actually give TransLink. So they should actually be in the same position as they started.
We started by giving inviting TransLink to take £15 million worth of cuts,
And you finished up giving them 10.
and we finished up giving them £13 million of cuts because the £2 million was taken off to help with the town services. So yes, they are looking to raise income through fares increases, and they're looking to reduce their costs in order to manage the deficit that's caused. Even with that, they will still sustain a loss, a projected loss of 10.8 million in 15-16.
And we're hearing today from the Minister, and I mean, I have to welcome that, Minister, and I hope you stand by that we're not going to see removal of service, but maybe, I think it was the frequency you did say.
Yes,
The other thing, just when we have you here, because TransLink were here, and they did indicate, and I think there's a strong feeling from them, they would be coming back to you for another increase in fares. Just when we have you here today, Minister, what's your view on that?
I'm against any second increase in fares in the current in the same financial year, and I've made that plain to TransLink. And I understand, and I think the chief executive of TransLink, when he was here, did explain or did raise his concern about the funding for TransLink, as he's perfectly entitled to do on behalf of the board of TransLink. But I don't support and will not sanction a second fare increase in the same financial year, because I understand the pressures that I'm trying to improve numbers within public transport. I'm trying to encourage more, and we've been successful at that. But I think I understand that when you increase fares to a level, then that will prevent from spending money on public transport. So you know that's a circular argument in my view that defeats the purpose of trying to promote public transport.
I was starting to take comfort from your words that you wouldn't put a second increase on us in the same financial year. However, the first increase went on 14-15. We're at the end of 14-15, so are you suggesting now going 15-16 we're not going to see an increase?
Yeah. Sorry, if it helps to clarify, calendar year. I'm against two increases in any calendar year.
Okay, so
If that's helpful.
that's helpful. Just open the floor then, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, one of the issues coming from a rural area is resurfacing, and I'm aware that some resurfacing contractors have laid off staff, or they're on temporary, or some of them hanging the balance, and this is due to the lack of money in the January monitoring round. Well, how much will be made available in the 1st of April? When will it be available? When will it be ready to hit the ground running so that these people can get back into work?
Well, I'm aware, in fact, I heard on the radio this morning an interview given by Gordon on behalf of the QPA, Quarry Products Association, and I understand they're making a presentation at some point to the committee this morning, and I don't underestimate, and in fact I've spoken to Gordon and his colleagues in the margins of this and offered a meeting when it's appropriate to hear some of their concerns, because I am aware of the impact that this is going to have, particularly on external contractors. And in real terms, this is the potential to cost jobs. And I'm not pleased about that or in any way satisfied that should be the case. But simply in terms of either capital and resource budget, we are severely underfunded. Andrew, do you want to touch on actually the impact from the 1st of April?
Yes, we have £22 million of money for structural maintenance, but structural maintenance includes a number of different things, including surface dressing, some patching work and structural drainage, and indeed some staff time in designing and supervising schemes. When you take all of those things out of the structural maintenance total, there is only a few £1 million left, maybe £3 million left for resurfacing at the start of the year. That's the worst position that I can ever remember the department being in, and it's the worst position for the contractors as well. Normally we like to have, we know we always get money during the year on the capital side, but we like to have enough at the start of the year to at least keep the contractors busy for the first quarter so that they can retain their skilled staff and so that they can then take additional money later on. We're not in that position this year, unfortunately.
In comparison to last year, Andrew, what was last year's? What's the reduction?
Last year, I think it was around 40.
The total budget reduction on capital is around £70 million. I know that the projection for what we should spend on structural maintenance is around £130 million a year. We haven't been able to do that in recent years.
Yeah.
John, do you have a figure for 14-15?
Well, our starting capital budget for structural maintenance, the equivalent of the 22, was about 45
Last year, that's right.
in this current financial year. We're hoping to outturn around 95 or thereabouts against our structural maintenance funding plan target this year, and that's not quite as good as we've achieved in previous years, where we've actually, through in-year monitoring, got significant additional monies which largely went on resurfacing. So this is a particularly disappointing year going into 15-16, where we've gone from 45.
It's certainly a very bad
22.
start to this year.
So what you're saying,
Sorry, next financial year.
John, that you're hoping for 95 million.
This year, we're currently projecting that will have total structural maintenance of about 95 or thereabouts this year.
And is that hoping to get out of monitoring rounds?
Well, no, that's based on the money that we've actually secured thus far this year, and that's a combination of patching and then all the other types of structural maintenance that Andrew was referring to. So that's our total. So we'll still be considerably short of the 130 million, which is the accepted sort of recommended level that we need to be spending to keep the condition of the network in a more or less steady state.
When would you think, is it going to take beyond the 1st of April? Is it going to be June before you're going to get any substantive money?
Well, June's the first opportunity that we have to submit bids to the centre for additional money.
So you're really saying there's just 3 million there from April to June?
From April to June.
So that will have, no doubt, negative consequences.
Yes, potentially. And I don't underestimate that. And as I've said, there is no pleasure in that at all. And even, the economics of this, this committee will know and has heard me before in this issue that yes, we pick up money as the years progress, as the financial year progresses through in-year monitoring, and come January we're expected to hopefully spend a lot of capital money that other departments haven't been able to spend. It doesn't make good economic sense. It doesn't plan for it, and it doesn't happen at a time of year when you can get the best value for it. And it also has to, it literally cracks contractors up too, because we're pressing them to spend monies that we have, and it puts huge pressure on them. It is not a good economic cycle.
And Chair, I just want to finish on Transport NI. You were saying 13 million, and it usually takes about 40 million. How are you really going to bridge that gap? Will there not be major public safety issues? Claims?
I have to say, Sean, yes, there is a huge challenge here to try and balance this. And this is not scaremongering or shroud waving, but there is a huge balance in protecting not only frontline services but health and safety issues, and that has to be to the very core and our prime responsibility, and we will seek to do that in the most cost-effective way that we can. But
Can you elaborate on it, Minister?
Well, I think it is difficult to elaborate. We haven't yet seen any significant increase in claims, but there is a potential that as the road structure weakens and defects and potholes cause damage, that there is that potential. So that has to be looked at. But there are safety issues in terms of street lighting and electrical installations that we have to protect and we have to spend money on. And that then takes away our capacity to cut grass verges to the number of times that we would like to or desire to clean gullies and maintain structural defects. So all of those issues are in the mix. So it is very, very difficult and very, very challenging. And we hope that as the financial year goes on, we can get more money. And we hope, and I would appeal that I will need, and this department will need, the assistance of this committee to continue to lobby for additional funds, because we genuinely are in a difficult position. And yes, there are. Other ministers will put forward their cases for the austerity that they face and for the cutbacks and for the savings that they have to. My responsibility is regional development and the services that we provide. This committee, as well as the scrutiny, I think has an important role to play in ensuring that it lobbies the central executive to ensure that proper funding that is provided to provide the services that people expect on a day-to-day basis.
And I think, Minister, that's a fair point. I mean, none of us take for granted some of the work that's done, but maybe picking up on a couple of last comments, if you don't mind, Sean. Not about grass version and gullies. But on one hand, what Andrew's saying, with 500 industrial staff sitting in the yard with nothing to do. But we have machinery.
I couldn't.
No, but the Transport NI network have machinery to do those tasks.
Yes.
Now, Andrew's on one hand saying with 500 men, or 500 individuals, we're not saying men, for correctness, and with 500 employees sitting in the yard with no work. That doesn't sit with me whenever you see that.
That wouldn't be acceptable. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't justify that. Yeah. And so therefore we are going to have to beg, steal and borrow to make sure that there is sufficient work and materials provided for them to carry out that work.
That's one point, and then I suppose the other one, and I suppose it's like anyone, whenever they're under financial pressure, they refocus their minds. But the new chief executive of TransLink only came into the organisation last year. He's identified, in your figures today, I think it was Peter Elshear's Minister, £5 million of organisational change. Why is it taking so long for someone to come in an organisation and in a short time to identify that £5 million savings? How many other of your departments, Minister, where the chief executives are not up to scratch, are not identifying the appropriate savings, so as the money can be spent in the right area. Because the other one, I'm just going to give you a few at the one go here, Minister. Alex Atwood raised a very good point yesterday in terms, or sorry, maybe Monday or Tuesday, in relation to the Yorkgate Inter-Exchange. I know this committee had a presentation. I think the capital cost of that project was somewhere around £160 million. Someone has came and made a presentation, and I think their feeling is that, yes, they got a presentation, but fairly dismissive, coming up with a fairly imaginative idea, and at the very least your department should have been doing is taking that man aside, getting someone to go and do a bit of modelling and exploring that. But it seems to be, we've got a problem, how do we fix it? We'll build more bridges or build more roads. And I mean, I know QPA and I are sitting here today. I'm actually on for new roads, but I'm on for roads where they're needed. And if there's other solutions that they're not needed, then we shouldn't be doing it. But there was a typical example where someone come with a very good idea. Even your answer to Atwood and myself, I felt was dismissive. That idea should be explored. If it doesn't work, that's fine, but it shouldn't be brushed aside just because someone in your department has got a big ego and they've come up with an idea and they want to make sure that's the runner.
Not about egos, Chairman, and either ministerial egos or departmental egos. Let me assure you that it's about delivering the best and most effective scheme for anything. You will be aware that we are now proceeding to public inquiry on that particular scheme, on New York Street Interchange. And there again, there will be an opportunity for people to test the proposals that are made, to make alternative proposals, and to have those tested there as well by the inspector. I'm open to ideas as to how we can save money in all aspects of the business, both in terms of maintenance and in terms of projects that are going ahead. You know, you'll not find any dispute from me that says if there's a better way to do it, if it's more cost effective, but it achieves the same outcome, if it improves the overall network, then, you know, we will explore that fully. Let me absolutely make that clear. And in terms of both departmental services savings, we are bearing down, let me assure you, and Peter may want to pick up on this, but we are bearing down on costs where we can continue to save money, and we are making progress on that, and we will continue to make progress on that.
We're certainly doing a line-by-line scrutiny of our budget and going through all the different processes as to how we could do things more effectively. In terms of the response to Sean's earlier question, the Minister has asked that we put in place a skeleton service. That is the very bare minimum that could be done in order to protect public safety. We do not, at the moment, have the funding for that. We would be proceeding at risk, and that's something the Minister explained in his opening remarks. That would be designed to ensure that we meet the public safety concerns and that we fully occupy the workforce that we have, because it would be unforgivable for that not to be the case. But even so, at that skeleton level, people will notice a difference in the quality of the service that is being provided compared to that which the whole of the organisation is used to providing. And people are, it's going to be very difficult for people within the organisation to come to terms with the fact that they will be delivering a lesser service than they are capable of delivering because of the financial consequences. But just as TransLink are making savings, they've made 2 million savings through efficiency and through management costs. The 5 million you referred to includes service reductions that they're currently consulting on at the moment. Northern Ireland Water have been through a huge process of reducing costs as a result of their regulatory impact. When they became a company in 2007, there were 1,800 or so employees in Northern Ireland Water. It's now around 1,300. They've also reduced costs elsewhere, as well as improving the quality of their outcome. And within the department, we've already taken serious measures in terms of reducing the size of our senior management group. We are now going through the voluntary exit process, which means around 10% of the employees of the department are likely to leave in the course of 15-16. And we anticipate there will be some further reductions in 16-17 beyond that. So all parts of the department are going through a very rigorous process of cost reduction.
And just on that last point, in terms of that 10%, how much is that going to save you in a year, Peter?
In year, we project it'll probably save around £1.9 million. Clearly, when you have the full year impact, then that's significantly more. It grows to 7.5 million, I think it is, around that.
Okay, thank you. John, you're next.
Chairperson, thanks, Minister. It's traditional and political world for the Minister to fall on his sword when his department feels and I would be very reluctant to pursue that because I believe you inherit an awful legacy. But you're in the post a long time now, and you did make promises that you would change things. You would look seriously at the people on the boards of TransLink and NIW and whatever else. It hasn't happened. And this morning, just before you came in, we were told there's an application in to extend the appointment of a person on the Northern Ireland Transport Holding Company. I'm sure the Commissioner for Public Appointments will be absolutely delighted with that, since he went to the trouble last January to produce a report with 22 recommendations on how improvements to public appointments are needed, and that clearly. Now, that's just a side issue. In your introduction this morning, you told us that you were moving money from road service to NIW. Northern Ireland Water was presided over by Lawrence Mackenzie and other people who nearly killed it off. Are we now, is the choice now water in the taps but no tar on the roads?
Chairman, thanks, Mr. Dallas, for your question. Let me say, in terms of public appointments, and we've worked closely with the Commissioner for Public Appointments, and the Commissioner has been complimentary in my attempts to change the profile of and the nature of people who are appointed to public boards and bodies, and I am seeking to ensure that there is greater participation, particularly from groups which are underrepresented and people who haven't been given previously a chance, and the Commissioner has recognised that. You will be aware that the chairman of the holding company, John Throne, his term expires very shortly. And there are also appointments required for the board, and so it was on that basis that I agreed to the extension of contract for one particular board member. So I am about giving others with ideas. It's by no means automatic that people having been appointed for one term will be reappointed automatically, and I've made that clear. I understand that some people have been expressing unhappiness with that, but that's what I want to do. I do want to see change evolve and bring forward people with new ideas and different experiences and life experiences, and bring those to public bodies. Let me say, you may say that I'm protecting NI Water at the expense of Transport NI. I'm in the difficult situation that, given the recommendations of the utility regulator, given the pressure that there is in terms of water quality and European standards and the potential for infraction action to be taken by Europe against NI Water, and not least to ensure that NI Water, their status is their legal status and their operating status is protected, then I've had to, from draft budget to final budget, supplement by another 10 million. And still, there's a shortfall there of £5 million. Now, I have to maintain also that and keep TransLink as a viable and operable company under law. I have no choice but to do that. Now, the only other option, therefore, that I have within my overall budget responsibilities is to take that money out of Transport NI. That doesn't give me any pleasure. We've talked earlier about the pressures that are now attendant on Transport NI and the services, the frontline services that potentially there will be serious impact on. But I have to deal with the hand that's given to me, and I really need the help and support of this committee as we go forward and lobby to the central executive, so that we can achieve more funding to satisfy all aspects of my departmental responsibilities.
Chairperson, thank the Minister for his answer, and I've listened very carefully, he's repeated again his appeal to this committee for support. That support, Minister, has been forthcoming,
yes,
but it hasn't been reciprocated. And a number of things have happened that has upset individuals. I, on a personal basis, have sought to keep the politics out of it and to work with you, and you know that. And I have various correspondence from you in relation to that. But look, you do know that the CEO of TransLink did say TransLink would bust in 2 years. That worries me, and Chairperson, I'm not straying into the capital project, but Minister, recently you wrote to me and said that the phase 2 of the Derry-Belfast Railway could be funded out of TransLink's budget. Now we know that TransLink's likely to be bust in 2 years' time.
TransLink, I can't afford to let TransLink go to the wall.
But I'm sorry, the point I'm
That doesn't
pursuing
make,
is in
I
relation.
just couldn't stand over that, John.
No, I understand that, but you know, I was led to believe that the money for the upgrade of the railway was ring-fenced in TransLink's budget. But you and now accept TransLink could face bankruptcy if it's not bailed out. So where is the money coming for the upgrade of the railway?
But the protective measures that I'm trying to protect TransLink from going to the wall.
Well, the question I have, Minister, I'm sorry for cutting across the Chairman, is in protecting TransLink from going to the wall, is it reasonable to assume that the money for the upgrade of the railway is not in their budget?
It is in their budget.
It is.
It is still in their budget. And it is a priority. I've, on the floor of this House, given the commitment that I see it as a TransLink commitment.
So as part of the budget for TransLink for capital,
Can
there
you
is,
mention it? What's the figure?
I think for 15-16, it is 17.3 million has been allocated to TransLink for the railway upgrade.
But the upgrade, we believe, is somewhere in the region.
But that's for the 1 year. That's not
That's not the total cost. The works will take longer than
you
than-
can't
than
spend
a
it all in
single
1 year. So you only allocate the money that you can spend in a year.
So the upgrade is not going to be finished this year.
It'll be started.
Work
The plan
will
is it'll be started in September, but it won't be finished.
We would anticipate that the work would start this year.
But sorry, Chairperson, keep me right if I'm wrong here. I understood that phase 2, the bypass or the passing loop, will be finished this year.
No.
Sorry, how many years is it going to take?
The contract will begin hopefully this year, right?
Yeah.
And there are other issues to be resolved. And
Well, sorry.
I was always expecting handcuffs when I arrived here this morning, but
No, but
avoided that.
you know, in trying to be
They're waiting
helpful
on
to
you
you,
on the way out.
Sorry?
They're waiting on you on the way out. We want to hear from you first.
in trying to be helpful to you, Minister, and trying to appreciate the difficulties you have, I did write to the Minister for Finance and Personnel asking that he made any provision for priority funding for the project we're just talking about. But in his reply, he says that no request has been made. Surely you should be screaming from the rafters of the office of the Minister for Finance and Personnel to get the money to upgrade the railway, rather than pinching the money from one department and moving it to another to keep NIW afloat.
But in terms of capital, in terms of capital allocation from my department to TransLink, I've made it clear that as part of that, that capital investment, that I want to see the upgrade done as a priority. And, you know, generally the message from DFP is it is up to individual ministers to manage their budget. And I'm managing the budget and I'm prioritising as part of the capital transfer to TransLink for the upgrade, the funding of that upgrade.
Yeah.
So I think we're on the same side, actually.
Well, I think we are, because I believed up until recently we were on the same side. But then the recent revelations suggest that maybe there's worry. I hope the assurance we've got, Minister, this morning is the one that I've spent 20 years fighting.
Yeah.
And I appreciate things weren't rosy in the garden when you took over.
John, if you don't mind me interjecting there, you're talking about the money secured then from TransLink. Did I not read somewhere that you're away, and I mean quite rightly so if you can get it somewhere else, but was the money not been chased from Europe?
Yes, well, all capital projects we look with with the interest and the hope that we can attract European funding. But that's never, you can never guarantee that. So you have to make provision, and if it comes, actually, when it comes back from Europe, it goes straight to the Finance Minister. And that's, you know...
If you get it.
If we get it. So that's... I think there's an argument, which I hope the committee would support, that the departments who manage to attract EU funding should be allowed to spend that EU funding within their own department.
I'd agree with that.
Could I just correct a figure I gave to Mr Dallett, because I read the wrong column as I was doing it quickly. I said that the amount available this year was around 17 million. It's actually 16.2 million for 15-16. It's just so that there's no inaccuracy.
Well, we'll not fight over that as long as the whole thing adds up to the 40 million that we believe is needed to give us a decent intercity service between Belfast and Derry. Minister, I met some people involved in community transport on Monday night, and they're, as we speak, preparing to pay their staff off because there's no money. I mean, what are you saying this morning that can reassure those people? And I'll tell you why. One of our councillors in Northampton gave me some figures for the cost of rural transport. To go from the Glens of Antrim, Bushendall, I think, to the city hospitals, £84. That's because there's no other way of doing it. To go to the hospital in Coleraine, 60. That's using tax. If there's no, and even the community transport that exists is not adequate to meet the needs, obviously, of everybody. Can we say this morning for sure that community transport is safe?
Well, what I can say is we will work with providers, and we believe that there are efficiencies are possible. It seems to me that there are very high figures that those transfer figures from the sites that you've indicated seem to be very high, and one would hope that we could improve efficiencies there without impacting on the service, because it's a very valuable service. But we are in discussions with the providers, offering advice and seeking ways by which we can offset some of the impacts, because we don't want to impact on the important services that community transport provide. They do give particularly an outlet to rural dwellers living in isolated communities. I think I am a strong supporter of the scheme, but I think there are efficiencies there that can be worked on.
And, Chairperson, just finally, Minister, to take up your offer this morning of better relationships between this committee and your department, what can you do to stop the failure of providing papers on time to the committee?
Well, that's something that I'm prepared to look at, and I am prepared to discuss with the committee and with the chair and the deputy chair and the clerk, perhaps a better relationship, both in the flow of information and indeed the necessity, I think, for us to combine and get our heads together on some of the challenges that we collectively face. And I'm open to that. I think the chairman is open to that. So presumably the deputy chair too. So, you know, I'm open and willing for that engagement.
Chairperson, I'm pleased to hear that, and I do hope it's for real, because there's no point in this committee wasting its time sitting here if we're not having the full cooperation of your department and indeed those subsidiary bodies like TransLink who went off and put up their fares without even talking to the Consumer Council. That Minister, at the end of the day, the buck stops with you.
I'm aware of that.
Carol, you want a supplementary before I call David?
Yeah, just Chair, when we were on just on the railway phase 2 of the Derry Coleraine section, welcome to the 16.2 million identified TransLink, although the start date I think has somewhat slipped there from what it was to be in May. But it was just further to what you were saying just at the time in terms of European funding. And I think I said it within the report there that the capital and resource allocations for the incoming year are 0.5 and 2.86 respectively. I don't think that adds up particularly to a significant amount that may be coming in to the budget there. How would you answer that?
Yeah, Europe doesn't necessarily fund the work. Sometimes it funds the studies or the associated.
I appreciate that, but that's fairly minuscule.
But I mean, we're in the business of getting the maximum from Europe, and sometimes that doesn't happen until work is already underway and money is being expended. So, and again, the downside of it is it goes back to the central source.
I mean, I think we have been quite successful in drawing down European funding, and I don't have the figures with me. Perhaps we could write to the committee and set out the levels of funding we have secured, if that would be helpful.
Just maybe on that.
Sorry, but just the point is that does look a very modest figure in terms of the overall project.
I think, to be fair, we have the best record in terms of the executive of drawing down European funding, and that's a league that I'd like to stay atop of.
Minister, maybe I'm following on that vein. I suppose one of the first meetings I had with Andre and other senior officials, the same topics were discussed in terms of giving it back to the centre. And I don't think anyone, even including myself, wouldn't support you or your department in relation to securing that money. However, when we read the news today and the Quarry Products in terms of their announcement that possibly 200 jobs could be lost, is there not another opportunity at the moment, given there's some big schemes out there that are sitting in the back burner, to go and chase additional capital? Let's try and forget about the going to the centre. I mean, I think surely if there's big capital jobs identified, surely the centre will see the necessity to continue the jobs within the likes of the Quarry Products people and all the associated subsidiaries of that. Because if you take the point you did make earlier, there's a 4-month gap now already where it looks like that announcement or that suggestion from the Quarry Products could become the reality. Going forward, certainly we'd like to see those people reinstated. But there's a feeling, I mean, and I sensed that from that day, and I don't mean to be disrespectful. I don't think it was Andre made it, so I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I can understand the disappointment where your officials go to search funding and are successful, but to lose it in the other hand. But at the same time, I don't believe that should stop them going to get it. And I mean, you do make a very valid point in terms of your success. But given the climate we're in today, and there is some big schemes sitting in the back burner awaiting money. I mean, and I'll be parochial, everybody else says, I could talk about the A6, which will take us right up to Londonderry at £300 million.
Right. I mean, let me say, I can confirm that we are pursuing, my officials are pursuing funding opportunities from Europe for the A6, for the York Street interchange, and for the Southern Relief Road in the Newry area. And you know, and I think just because we don't automatically benefit from the potential proceeds of that doesn't lessen our resolve to try and obtain it, because the likelihood is that we would get some benefit, if not all of the benefit. You know,
so I think something going forward we should explore together to see how we can address that with the centre, to try and make sure that that monies that you do get and are successful is directed back to our network as opposed to going into some other pipe dreams of some of the other ministers in the executive. David, you were next.
Thank you. You're welcome. Minister, you concluded your opening remarks to us by saying that you hope that we would be enlightened. Can I say you have enlightened us? Your department's a shambles with little sense of a professional recovery. You're today projecting a £30 million overspend. I'll say it looks like gung-ho winging a prayer economics, and to me that's very reckless. If we could have a look at Translink first, Chairman, and in deference to the worried workers and indeed the consumers, the customers, can I ask directly how long you will go with the loss-making in Translink, especially when it trades below its threshold set by the department, and we all know that without subsidies it would be insolvent?
But Translink, I mean, we are the principal and only shareholder of Translink. Translink, public transport is funded to a large extent by the department and therefore by central government. I have to say, and you know, I think Mr McNary, you've hinted at this before, that somehow the privatisation of some services of Translink would be somehow a lucrative solution to this. In my view, that's not the case.
That's not my question either. My question was, how long are you going to put up with this loss-making company, right? You said earlier on...
This provides
you
essential
said
public
you cannot
transport
afford
services
to let the
to people of
TransLink
Northern
go to
Ireland.
the wall. That's your statement. You cannot afford to let TransLink go to the wall.
Well, would you...
No.
No. Would you advocate...
It's you.
Sorry. Would
It's
you
you.
advocate, Mr McNary,
You're
that the
you're
public
minister.
transport system
Answer the question.
would go to the wall?
Answer
Because
the question.
it doesn't make any sense. I mean, we can have sound bites and we can have, you know, you can make allegations, you can call again for me to resign. That's not going to solve the issues that are before us at this committee, David.
Far from it, Minister, because you're not solving anything to do with TransLink. There's no pressure on
Can I
them,
remind both
no
of you?
incentive.
Can I remind both of you all comments through the chair, please?
Indeed.
Here, here.
In terms of roads, your budget has taken $5 million from roads to assist with the losses in NIW, and you haven't taken money from anywhere else to put back into roads. Very recently, in a reply to an AQ of mine, you told me that there was 351,000 carriageway, hard shoulder and lay-by surface defects that had been instructed for repair. Now, although my question related to roads in general, your answer concentrated on the carriageway, the lay-bys, etc. And it didn't give any figures for other roads, particularly the rural roads. Can you put a figure on that? Additionally, are we talking about an extra 250,000, 500,000 repairs that are out there beyond the carriageways and the lay-bys and the hard shoulders?
I think it is. I mean, it's hard to estimate through you, Chair, the total number of defects, but certainly the representations that I get, and I do mingle within the community and hear at first hand the concerns of people, both in the rural and urban communities, and there is the road network, particularly for minor roads, is under severe pressure, and I don't underestimate that. I don't think we have an absolutely accurate total that we could stand over at this point. If we can research that and provide that, we certainly
That would be very
will.
useful, because you did also tell me that the defects for those 351,000 repairs, they were recorded by officials during inspections. I assume that the same officials or different officials, some officials are recording defects on the rural roads. What I'm trying to really get at is the road user. They probably pay they're among the biggest heavily taxed people there are, and I'm sure you, like me, and everyone else around the table is getting it in the neck about the state of the roads, particularly rural roads. What concerns me is how you're able to allocate something like £5 million in your budget for compensation to the motorists who've been affected by the disrepair in the roads, and still proceed with a policy that says these roads are not going to be repaired. Do you think it would be possible to put more unsafe signs out on the roads, or even potentially, or give a list to the road users, to the public, what roads? It would probably be better if we were to say what roads are going to be repaired in the next year, rather than what roads aren't, but both, because both would be very, very helpful. The point I'm getting to is that it appears to me very clearly that the public have lost confidence in the situation which presents them with very, very poor disrepair in the roads. Most people don't have to go far from their driveway or their door to be hitting bad pockets. Now, I know you have a problem. You said earlier on in answer to a question that you were identifying priorities. I haven't heard that road repairs is a priority. So I'm asking, is it a priority? And obviously, is it a priority now out of 10? Is it a priority out of 3?
No, the challenge, Mr. McNary, through the Chair, is, you know, unfortunately, there are more defects in the road network currently than we can actually address. And we simply don't have the money to address them in the time and in the period that people would like them reacted to. And everywhere I go, and absolutely everywhere I go, even when I go to my place of worship, people will sidle up to me and say, I know this is not the time and place, but there's a pothole or there's a defect here. And all of us as public representatives, I'm sure, are the same, whichever church we choose to go to, or none perhaps. But so, you know, there is, unfortunately, we are in very strained financial position. Yes, it is of course a priority and a desire on my behalf to seek to have repairs done as quickly as possible.
If I may just interrupt, in terms of catch-up, I'm trying to address advice that one may give to your constituents like me when they grab you on the shoulder at coming out of church to ask about things.
That's not the only place, of course.
Pardon?
That's not the only place.
It was just you alluded to
Yes,
it, so I just letting you know that you're not the only one that goes to church on a Sunday, probably. In terms of being able to give some information, it's the catch-up. In other words, if I take around some, say the figure's 10 now, right? Will it be 20 at the end of this year? And how do you then catch up so that you go back in terms of the catch-up?
Yeah, but in my view, it's pretty much never ending.
Well, you see, that seems to me to be a message that the people in that industry need to be able to have some information about, to be able to plan themselves, for their workforce. And I think that, I'm not saying you've ignored it, right? But I think it's being demonstrated very clearly that the state of the roads is not acceptable. Nor is it acceptable to say that you don't know when you'll have them back into good repair.
I agree with almost everything you say there. I am very concerned about the role that I have been in is really managing the decline of Northern Ireland's road network. We know we need more than £130 million per year to keep the road network in its current condition.
And does that include the rural roads?
That includes everything. And we know its current condition is not good enough. We know that if we get less than £130 million in any particular year, that will build up the maintenance backlog.
Now, to be fair, within the last couple of years, we've come close, if not hit, the 130 million. But that is simply to maintain. That is not to improve, which is your point.
I understand.
That if more money is spent on the maintenance of the road, less
finally,
defects will happen.
Just finally, Chair, just through you, if I may, just address on the situation and the state of the roads. How alarming, or is there any alarm, any need to be alarmed and caution about the safety factor to the road users where these roads are in disrepair? In other words, will it become necessary to say road closed, unfit for use? How close are we to that? Because that's what I'm hearing from people who are more expert than me on the state of roads.
I think circumstances like that would be absolutely exceptional, and so rare indeed that I wouldn't want such a situation to arise.
Well, that's very good to hear. That's very good to hear. Just finally, Chairman, in the capital expenditure aspect of your budget, you state the allocation will support progress of Belfast Rapid Transit. But you don't give any expenditure. Could I ask what expenditure is required? What allocation in monetary terms is being given out of your budget this year for Belfast Rapid Transit?
John, do you want to cover that?
In total, there's 13 million.
This year?
Now that covers there's a bus, there's the actual vehicles as well. There are vehicles for the rapid transit, and then infrastructure
Preparation,
works that you would see, preparation of on the roads.
Just out of interest, would that, sorry, John, would that mean that this coming
That's 15, 16.
coming and concluding financial year, 13 million will see the rapid transit system
No.
complete?
No, that's just
The rapid transit scheme, it's estimated will cost ultimately about 100 million. So we're actually, that has been trimmed back from original projection that we were hoping to spend on it.
So is that
both in the
13 million likely to be an annual sum that you will take out of your budget, or will it rapidly increase as progress goes? In other words, 13 million this year, will it be 50 million next year?
I mean, the target date for the introduction is still 2017.
Yeah.
So it would have to be well supplemented in the new financial period.
The obvious question is, how are you going to find that money? You're leaping from 13 to try and find 100, so that's 87 million you're going to have to find, according to plans, in the next 2 years for one item.
I think some of the money's already been spent.
That's capital
actually.
money, isn't it?
It's capital
capital,
money,
yeah.
and
capital.
so some of the money will be factored in terms of contracts already entered into this year that will run into future years. But yes, there will be financial pressures, and we will need to see whether there is enough money in the budget for 16-17 to be able to
So at
support this and everything
this
else.
moment of time, just for my constituents, and I'm sure other constituents, but we're looking forward to the rapid transit coming.
Work is proceeding.
From Dundonald. At this time, you believe that you're on schedule for the completion without any financial problems?
And we'll be
2017?
We'll be continuing to make the argument to both the Finance Minister and the Executive colleagues as to the importance of the Belfast Rapid Transit System and its potential to transform public transport travel in our capital city. And there's widespread support for it, and as I know, there's widespread support for this committee for it.
Okay, thank you, David. You're finished then, yeah?
Yeah, just finally,
Not finally. But it certainly is finally this time.
just to say that I have, to the Minister, I have no particular set thoughts on privatisation for TransLink in my mind, or never have I had. I have always seen the performance of this company, the dismal performance, the amount of money that's taken out of my and everybody's pocket to prop it up for nothing, because it is, as far as I'm concerned, it underperforms. But I have always wondered why competition could it not at least be considered, and particularly when TransLink are now acting like a privatised company and saying we don't want to service the non-profitable areas. That's what they're doing. So perhaps, Minister, we could maybe agree that I'm not after TransLink being privatised. Maybe there should be some competition, but I think most of the people like me are fed up throwing money to a white elephant.
Well, I don't accept that it's a white elephant, and I defend TransLink and commend it for the public service that it provides and the public transport that it serves to ever-increasing numbers, and I want to see that continue, and I want to encourage it.
Fair enough.
I think everybody does. Just before I call Joanne, Andrew, you did refer to the backlog. What is the backlog in terms of to quantify it today? How much would you have to spend to actually bring the roads up to an acceptable standard?
Well, the backlog is actually a measure of all of the defects, which is a mixture of safety defects and non-safety defects. I think it's around £800 million at present. I know we have projected forward and that if we don't get significant in-year money, 15-16, it would probably exceed $1 billion.
And just finally, you talked about 130 million is your baseline where you need to start. How much are you actually bidding for annually? How much are you actually asking for?
Oh, well, sorry, just one point on the 130 million. Anything you spend less than that increases the backlog.
I understand
Not just pound for pound, but about £1.50 per pound.
I remember you actually telling me that before, so that's why I'm wondering how much you actually bid whenever you're trying to...
We will bid for as much as we can spend, up to the £130 million. So if, for example, if we were able to keep our contractors busy for the first quarter,
65.
we would be bidding for enough to take us back up to the £130 million, because we could deliver that in the 3 remaining quarters of the year.
Sorry, Joe, I'm holding you back, but why are you not actually bidding for more then? To try and close the gap between where you're at and the 100-odd million today?
Sometimes at the beginning of the year we do bid for more. I mean, the prospects of getting more are...
As the year goes on, it gets harder, and it puts more pressure on contractors to be able to achieve. And the nature of it is that the money comes late, and other departments don't yield it until they're, you know, it's very clear that they're not able to spend it, and then it's up to us to spend it. That puts extreme pressure on contractors too. So it is not. It's that economic cycle that is not particularly useful or beneficial.
Joe, you're next one.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Well, again, to follow on the same theme, I'm trying to see through the fog here. What is the current structural maintenance budget allocation for this incoming year? And how much of it is impacting on Fermanagh and Tyrone, where we don't have 1 mile of railway?
Well, it's 22 million is the total budget for structural maintenance. 22 million is the budget going into 15-16. I don't think we can break it down by constituency, I'm afraid, Mr. Byrne.
But secondly, I appreciate that, Peter, but what do we do then where we have in Tyrone and Fermanagh smaller roads contractors that have machinery and staff, and they're living hand to mouth? And you also tell us that you have 500 blue-collar workers within the department and roads are transferred to NI, and they are looking around for work too.
Most of the work
How gloomy is the situation for those private contractors in Tyrone and Fermanagh that have remained in place, provided a good service at a cost-effective economic input, and they're being left hung out to dry at the moment?
Well, most of the work that's done by our in-house team is on the resource side rather than on the capital side, so it's of a maintenance nature. Not all of it, most of it is. I mean, the Minister has explained that we understand the difficulties that this is causing for contractors. There is still a substantial amount of money being spent on major road schemes through the Strategic Road Improvement Network, and a number of contractors would bid to be subcontractors on schemes of that nature, and there'll still be opportunities through that. So the total amount of money being spent on roads is significantly in advance of the 22 million. It's just that the structural maintenance itself is at that low level.
Well, Chairman, can I just say that there's one big capital project I've heard nothing about for weeks, that's the A5, so I'm just wanting a reassurance again from the Minister on that. In relation to the community transport and rural transport...
I mean, through you, Chair, the A5 remains an executive priority, and my understanding is it also remains a priority for the Irish Government.
Okay, I welcome that reassurance, because more and more people are beginning to ask again and again with doubt, will it ever be realised given the austerity situation that we're in. In relation to community and rural transport, 7.9 million was the starting point, and they're now being cut by 2 million, so there's almost a 25% cut. Why are we being so severe in kicking the community transport partnerships when Translink are not as efficient or effective? They're not suffering the same cut. Why are we coming down so hard on the community transport?
Well, I've said earlier that, you know, it wouldn't be my natural position to impose cuts even of that level against any of our services. But we are in very stringent financial circumstances. We are seeking to work with the providers of the transport schemes, and we'll continue to do that. And we're I think efficiencies can be made, perhaps working more collectively together, collaboratively together. I would be hopeful that the impact will not be as severe. But when you're faced with a position of effectively a 60 million deficit in terms of, in real terms of resource spending, then you have to take difficult and challenging decisions, and that's where we are.
Chairman, in relation to a very recent tragedy on the Malone Road, this committee has devoted many hours discussion to it, and I know the Minister met the family. But in this pack today, there are 257 pages relating to safety barrier inspection, detailed inspection pro forma, letter to Sanssouci Park, correspondence between DRD and Sanssouci residents, and so on. How many man-hours in the department goes into cover the neighbourhood?
Well, my understanding is Andrew is making a presentation after this on that particular issue. The committee asked for the full details, and we've provided those. I think it gives some indication as to how the importance that we attach to all of these aspects, that there is detailed preparation work and investigation work that has to be taken part of. And this is, I know, a very sensitive issue, and I have met the family, and I want to completely respect that and completely respect them.
And finally, Minister, when do you expect this barrier to be put up again? Because this game has gone on, this cat and mouse game has gone on, and it's adding to the frustration and pain of the family and indeed the student body.
My understanding, Mr. Byrne, is that work commenced on site within the last couple of days. That can be expedited as quickly as possible.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. Thank you, Joe. I mean, we'll go into more detail, obviously, and appreciate Andrew's here to do that. But I suppose just when we're on that, Minister, and you are here, because you're not here for the next session, I'm just wondering, and I mean, this is a very difficult one given someone with the tragedy involved in it, and I appreciate you did meet the family. And I think the committee has a difficulty in maybe how, but we'll go into that later. But we're wondering actually what caused you to give a ministerial direction actually for them to actually do something on site, given they were reluctant even after it was removed.
I think, having met the family, and that was a very considerable experience, and as you would expect it to be, I took a personal decision on that, if you like, almost not a political decision. There's no politics in it, but a personal decision that I wanted to see if by that action that would at least give the family some comfort.
I mean, just two other points we want to make. I mean, because we are going to this later, have you read all the correspondence in relation to this particular case from the department officials? Because there's one strikes me that I read that's fairly graphic prior to this incident. Yet all your officials were here and told us there was no recorded incidents on site.
I'm very, very familiar with the case. I have involved myself directly, and I'm aware of all aspects of the case. The real tragedy is the loss of life.
It is, Minister, and I don't want to dwell on it. However, I hope after this is resolved, in terms of this particular barrier, that maybe you would have another look at the whole background of this case, and if someone needs brought to task in making the wrong decision, I think that should actually happen, because certainly some of the correspondence takes away from some of the suggestions that was made by one of your officials.
Let me just confirm that I have instigated an independent review in relation to this case, and advice as to any other measures that we need to put in place.
Appreciate that. Declan, you're next. Thank you.
Chair, thank you. Minister, you outlined a very dire financial situation earlier, and was to welcome your commitment to meet with the QPA. In light of the situation you earlier, what do you hope to achieve out of that there? You know, what?
Well, I mean, obviously it's always important to hear firsthand the impact and to share that impact, and I think it's useful that they're sharing that with yourselves today and potentially other executive colleagues. I think these services are important. I think, yes, whilst health and education and other departments will put forward their cases for additional funding or need special cases, I think the services that are provided by my department are 24-hour-a-day, essential, 7-day-a-week services. The upgrade and the maintenance of our road, I think, is important to the economy. On that basis, given that the economy remains the primary objective to improve here in Northern Ireland, I do think that additional funding should be made available for my department in order that monies can be expended.
Chair, I also want to make a point in relation to this earlier with the community transport. It really does, and the whole scheme of the budget was allocated department. There isn't a great deal allocated anyway, and by the proposal to take £2 million of it really does look like penny pinching. And we've talked numerous times earlier on about health and safety issues and all the rest. These transport partnerships are in place to fill the gaps that are in public transport provision. So it's almost like a double blow to start to propose to cut 25% for those, because they're a vital lifeline. And people like, let's say, Table and we represent areas like the Springs, which is very, very isolated areas, and people rely on it because there isn't a very frequent public transport network through those areas. This fills the void. So you agree that that's it's an attack on very isolated community? Well,
it is not a deliberately intended attack, because I meet with and have met, even in the current period, with providers in the New Moor area, and they are serving isolated communities and giving people the opportunity to mix socially and attend various appointments and all of that. I understand the absolute importance of that. The difficulty is I cannot spend money that I don't have, and therefore we have to look critically. But rather than simply abandon people to their fate, what we're seeking to do is to work with them and with other agents and agencies to identify how we can plug some of the gaps.
Well, okay. During the last number of years, this committee done a lot of work in terms of doing variants of better use of public transport. We could look at more joint approach. Have any of those recommendations been taken on board or acted upon?
Yeah, well, we had, I think, a relatively successful reorganisation of some of the areas and groups. But we are going to have to continue to work at this, and so that will involve not only my officials but people who use the services and people who can perhaps assist us.
And there has been a pilot in Dungannon looking at a more integrated transport approach. Yeah. That pilot, if it's shown to be successful, might provide a model that we could look to expand on and see whether, because at the moment we do have a lot of different transport systems, there is, in addition to the work that TransLink does, the education and library boards still run their own transport system, health providers still have a transport system, there's still a rural transport provider system as well, and those systems perhaps aren't just as well joined up as they could be, so there could be some opportunities there.
But on that point, Peter, when are you due to report on that pilot?
Pilot, I think, was in place for a period of months, and then we wanted to review it. It hasn't crossed my desk at this point.
No, and that's the point. So, yeah. On one hand, some of us, and I'm a rural constituency too, we do see this as an attack on rural communities, and I appreciate the pilot has been done. But we can't attack on the rural communities in terms of the transport system, have a pilot done, and actually not come up with a conclusion whether it's successful or not, because if we're going to attack one, we need to replace it with the other, and we need to join these two things up, Peter.
We'll write to you with the time frame. I'm not going to...
But I think it...
Sorry, do you know the time frame, Andrew?
Well, we're actually very close to completion, but we are waiting on information from some of the other parties that need to cooperate with us on this. So, subject to that information being available, I think we're within about 2 months of completion.
Chair, can I just say, Chair, this has been talked about certainly I'm here 3 years, and this has been talked about for the last 3 years. I know that when we went to Loughry on a fact-finding mission, right in the heart of that project, we didn't hear glorious or great ideas or of how it was affecting the students in the college, for example. We just didn't pick that up, and we brought that back, passed it into the department. But the point I will make is that your budget, you're talking about 300 odd million for your allocations per annum, right? 35% of the North population live in rural areas. We're talking 8 million for community transport, of which we're proposing to take 2 million out of. So I think we're already starting from a piecemeal amount of funding. What we're doing is actually penny pinching the funding. I think these are very vulnerable communities which need to be taken on board, considered when we're looking at budget allocations. Like I note there, you said you can take £2 million in terms of your department. Could that not be used to help?
But that's already factored. The money that we're taking, savings we've already made, already been factored into the budget. What the Minister's been trying to demonstrate is that it's not that we've got pots of money somewhere that we could take money from to give to community and rural transport. That's really the problem.
Okay, thank you. Alex Easton.
Yeah. Hi. Next year's budget, you've £13 million to find, is it, for next year?
Right? Sorry, this year, there's a potential overspend of 13 million. It relates to the harbour, the transfer of assets, £20 million that the executive wanted to achieve out of that in successive years. They plugged that gap last year. There have been there's been a lot of to and fro in this, even around the executive table. It's clear that we're not able to extract the £20 million either last year, which was then funded by the centre. Next year it's provided for in the budget, but this year the gap remained, in spite of the fact that I had made clear to the budget review group that it wasn't going to be possible to find that 20 million. We, through our own careful use of our finances, we used that from 20 to approximately 13, but that is projected overspend, and of course, that will undoubtedly obtain criticism from the usual quarters.
Okay, so next year it's going to be 60 odd million for the...
No.
Oh, yeah?
No,
2014-15.
Next year is 20 million.
Right, okay.
Has been plugged on that.
Right, okay. Okay, in regards to TransLink, they have reserves still, or...
And increasingly dwindling.
Yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of conversation about TransLink's reserves. And at the start of the year, I think they had £55 million worth of net current assets. They're projecting a loss, I think it's 14 million in 14-15, that will reduce that to 41 million. They then are projecting a loss next year of around 11 million, so that will bring you down to 30 million. In the course of next year, they normally self-fund some of their capital. They would plan to self-fund £12 million of capital next year, which would bring you down from 30 to 18 million. And the best estimate is that they need 15 million of what's called working capital in order just to be able to pay their bills and keep going. So on that basis, by the end of 15-16, their reserves will be down at the bare minimum that they need in order to function as a business, and they will have lost the ability to self-fund capital for future years, which means they'll become entirely dependent on what the department can provide them rather than any money that they might have themselves.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's good to actually get that. Do you want to
comment on that point? Just through those figures quite quickly, Peter, but what you've left out, so that's assuming a standstill situation, but what about, are they not actually, was there reserve not increasing year on year?
I don't think it is, because it's reducing because of the amount of the loss that they're making there, and the reserves only increase if they make a profit.
But was their loss not based on the fact that you were reducing the amount of funding you were giving them?
Some of that is, so 10 million of that loss would be as a result of the reduced funding that we gave them.
Or maybe I should ask you a different way then. How did they ever get the 51 million of reserve? Why did the department continue to fund them if they were carrying such a large reserve in the past?
Well, it's because of the self-funding they do of capital, and then it was just about making sure that they're in a stable place. You wouldn't choose to keep them right at the level, the bare minimum level of 15 million on an ongoing basis, because that means if there are any shocks to their system in terms of unexpected expenditure, the whole business becomes very vulnerable. Those figures don't take account of redundancy costs, so they're projecting redundancy costs for 15-16 of around £10 million. That we bid for against the voluntary exit scheme pot that is available to the whole public sector. But if they're not successful in securing all of that money through that source, then there's some extra costs that would come off their cash reserves, and that's precisely the kind of shock that you'd find, which is why you would not choose to keep them at the very lowest level possible.
Yeah, on the voluntary exit scheme, have you actually gone out to TransLink staff as yet?
Yeah.
TransLink, I think, have not formally commissioned an exercise, but they are looking at making a bid on the executives. I think some of the management posts have been announced. There was an announcement made a few weeks ago about the £2 million of savings they were hoping to make through management and administrative savings. Clearly, they need to know the outcome of the current consultation about bus services to understand where they may need to go out and seek for expressions of interest for a voluntary scheme within the wider business.
And TransLink employees are not considered civil servants. We'll understand they're effectively public servants, but they're not civil servants. And so we are having discussions with the AFP in terms of the voluntary exit scheme as to how TransLink staff might engage in that or be part of that.
And that would, if that goes ahead, that would be for all TransLink staff to apply if they want?
Well, I think
all
it's obviously up to TransLink management to decide how they're doing it, but it'll need to be focused in on the areas where they no longer need people to deliver services because of changes to their service provision that they're making.
That's me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Cathal, you were next.
Yes, Chair. I don't want to rehash what others have said, but I would have thought that the reserves that TransLink had would have been quite a comfortable security blanket at a point. And for the life of me, for the record, I just can't square the dichotomy between what the Minister said here this morning about he had no other option other than to keep TransLink a viable company, and what the Chief Executive told us a few short weeks ago in terms of that. But that, again, is just for the record. A lot of what I was going to say have been asked, but one of the things I just wanted to ask, Minister, in terms of one of the first victims, perhaps, of any of these cuts were the outside contractors that came in, particularly for the street lighting aspect of it, and further to a couple of AQs that I put to you in terms of Transport NI and specifically snowplough blowers and gritting provision. This year.
I think they're on their way back to you if you haven't already received them.
I've just received them actually yesterday there, but further to that, quite a percentage of that goes to outside contractors and to farmers and to others, like particularly for the rural areas. How much of that has been reduced, particularly over this in recent times? Because, you know, I referred to the 2nd of March incident, and where it took me an hour driving 11 miles, and don't say I had a car that got once too, but you know what I'm saying. I'm going over Glen Shane, where there was only one private contractor presence during that rush hour. So, could I just say, have you a breakdown of that in terms of what has gone out?
I don't believe there's been a change in 15-16, has there, Andrew, in terms of the delivery of winter service?
No, there hasn't.
So 14-15.
14-15 winter service has been delivered as normal, which basically means that we do most of the work ourselves. We bring in private sector drivers where we need them, and if we need a snow clearance operation, we bring in the contractors that are really signed up to us for that task.
But the challenge will be for 15-16, where the funding isn't available for winter service, and that may well be part of the skeleton service, but it's still very challenging.
I mean, we simply, I can't tolerate a situation where there is no winter service. I mean, in popularity stakes, it wouldn't be great.
Just say there was questions this year over, and where you probably were fortunate to have a relatively mild winter, but it probably helped things. But there were questions.
Well,
around.
it's part of the reason that we're overspending. The Minister directed that we should continue to deliver core public safety-related services, of which winter service was one. And so the money we're spending on winter service is part of the reason there's going to be an overspend this year, because that was one of the things that we could have stopped doing. It's one of the few things that is not legislatively required of us.
And
but it has huge public safety
ironically,
implications.
I mean, the department will face criticism for that, for that overspend. But I simply couldn't tolerate, either on a personal or any basis, winter services or other essential life-impacting services being abandoned or reduced.
Okay, thanks, sir.
Just on that same point, Minister, then, maybe I should ask Andrew, how much did you, I mean, this last 2 or 3 years, I mean, certainly this year, last year, we've been fairly light in terms of the winter that we've suffered. So did you actually save money in those last 2 years?
Well, yeah, that's not a question of saving money. You spend less money on a mild winter than you spend on
That's the same thing as saving it, Andrew.
Generally, we would base our allocation for winter service on the average of the previous 5 years.
Right.
And generally, that's not too far away from what the real picture is. If we spend less than that, and we know we're going to spend less than that towards the end of the year, we reallocate the money to other.
But this year we've actually spent slightly more than usual, because although there's not been as much snow on the ground, there have been a lot of days when there's been a lot of ice.
A lot of frost.
Maybe, if you wouldn't mind, just giving us a picture of what you spent maybe over the last 5 years, each of the last 5 years, if you could send that to the committee.
Yes, we
what the actual spend was.
certainly could.
Maybe over the last 3 years, if that's helpful, the period of this. But I mean, we'll provide as much information as we can.
Okay. Cathal, you were finished, weren't you?
Yes, thanks, Chair.
Right, Chris, you were next.
Thanks, Chair. It's been a lengthy session, so I'll try and be brief. Minister, you've been fair in saying that we need to be open and honest about the difficult decisions faced in prioritising the very scarce resources that you have available to you. We've heard warnings from NI Water, Transport NI, and we hear warnings from yourself in relation to infrastructure provision. Those warnings have included potential service disruption in water, infraction fines, possible underinvestment in road repairs, street lighting, job losses, reduction in public transport services. So at what point does the ongoing executive subsidy of domestic water pricing, believed to be in the region of £300 million per year, actually become more of a public cost than a public benefit?
Well, Chris, you will know that that these are issues that the executive in its entirety has to approach. I'm supportive of the current situation, and that, as indeed my party is, that no household charges to be applied within this mandate. And if there are to be changes in that, then I think those changes have to be looked at in the round, in the context, and with political consensus, because, you know, otherwise, so, you know, there are tough decisions for the executive to face, not only in terms of that, but on other issues, including the introduction of corporation tax. So, you know, put all those into the mix. The issue about welfare and how that is funded into the future. So the executive has challenges too, and I will play my part in those discussions. But I think it would be foolish of me to say that I would charge ahead and advocate a scenario that wouldn't garner either executive support, political support, or assembly support.
Okay, Minister, you also recently said that you had put, I think, an options paper to the executive in relation to potential reform of governance and financing arrangements for NI Water. What level of response have you had from the executive in relation to that, and can you give us some idea of some of the content of those options? That
paper was submitted some time ago, and it contains all of the available options, and it's still for consideration by the executive.
Okay. In terms, be remiss of me, Chair, not to take an opportunity to ask within this budget what level of budget allocation you have available to you to deliver the cycling revolution that you've spoken of, that I wholeheartedly support.
Well, I have sought to protect the very limited resources that we had allocated against cycling, because when you believe in something, I think you should put your money where your mouth is, as far as you can. But you know, it's not just a matter of capital outlay. It's a matter of smarter thinking and a better and a wider approach in terms of cycling. And in the development of road improvements or new schemes being brought forward, we can make significant improvements to cycling infrastructure. And so that's what I want to, and that's a clear message that the department knows that I'm particularly keen on.
There's no particular line item total in relation to cycling budget at this
There's a
stage?
specific budget allocation of £2 million for cycling-only schemes, particularly, I think, focused around Belfast, and there's a small team within Transport NI that is being created to make sure those are delivered. But as the Minister said, there's also then cycling could be part of many other schemes as well, and the budget wouldn't be separately allocated on that basis.
And again, it's worth saying that we're exploring opportunities through European funding, particularly on a cross-border nature, where cycle paths and you know, can be developed.
Okay. I suppose in addition to that smart approach, obviously investment in infrastructure across the board is essential. Can I ask a final question, Chair? What is the potential impact for you and the department should that overspend become reality, as you think it's likely to?
I think at that point, Permanent Secretary is more in danger of going to jail than I am, but I'm heading that way because of the power report, apparently.
We can maybe get you a twin cell.
So well,
He's pleading guilty already.
Mr. Little's colleague, the Minister for Justice, might make special provision. I'm hoping both of us can avoid it.
Okay, thanks.
Ross, you're next.
Suggestions you would go on the run there, Minister. You might get the prerogative of mercy as well. You never know.
Well, unlikely, I would have thought.
Can I say how pleased I am to see you here this morning, like everybody else? I have a couple of questions, and clearly a lot of stuff has already been mentioned here today. According to some, I could even say yes, Minister, occasionally, but I won't this morning. If water charges were introduced, it doesn't necessarily mean that the money is going to go to your department. If an amount of money comes in, it doesn't necessarily mean your budget is going to be increased accordingly.
That's right. Yeah.
Simple as that.
Well, I mean, it would be, as I've said, it is for the central executive to determine outcomes in this.
Europe has been mentioned a couple of times. Before we go down that line, how many sort of shovel-ready projects are there sitting that if we had the funding tomorrow we could start?
Well, we're obviously I cut the first sod yesterday at Macrofelt for the bypass. Something similar is happening tomorrow for the A26. And those are long-awaited schemes for people in that area, and that's very good news, and those allocations have been made. The next batch, if you like, includes schemes such as, and we've made the Castle Dawson section of the A6 effectively shovel-ready, subject to finance. As I've said earlier, we're also exploring with Europe potential funding opportunities for not only the A6 but also Southern Relief and the York Street interchange. So on this, there is the ongoing work and progress being made on the A5 too. You know? So, you know, there are schemes that are coming up, working their way up through. That's my job, to keep them moving, so that at any point, if the Finance Minister or the Executive say, we're good to go here, we've got shed loads of money for capital, hit the button. And as well as that, there are the other important things that impact on local, you know, the smaller schemes, the bypasses, Banlahinch bypass, Millennium Way, Lurgan. Those are schemes that we're trying to progress as quickly as we can. So it's, I mean, it's not all doom and gloom, and it's been a fairly heavy session here looking at the downside of things, but I think there are opportunities that we can make progress, we can improve the overall infrastructure, we can seek to provide and provide better maintenance on a road network, because I do firmly believe that infrastructure is one of the keys to reigniting this economy. And as well as investment in jobs and as well as encouraging foreign direct investment and all of that, it is important that the ability to move people and goods and services in this country happens to its maximum, and then we can, the economy is bound to benefit from that.
You mentioned the A5, and clearly you have 3 West Tyrone MLAs here today. Yeah. The situation with the A5, it is still the legal process that is holding it up as opposed to DRD?
We're still working through the judgment delivered by Lord Justice Stevens. We're not taking any predetermined view. We're being careful to work through, dot all the I's, cross all the T's, and make progress on it. I hope in coming weeks that at some stage we will announce the various statutory orders for that scheme. It is likely, we're still considering the public consultations that have taken place, but it is likely that it will necessitate a public inquiry. That final decision on that is not yet made, but all of these things are still in the mix.
In relation then to rural link and transport systems, clearly again in a constituency like West Tyrone we do have an awful lot of isolated communities. You know about it from your own constituency, you know what we're talking about. When your officials are considering what cuts are being made, is rurality taken into account? Is, for example, some weight given to the fact that in rural Tyrone they do not necessarily have access to public transport? Quite a bit has been mentioned in relation to the railway system, Belfast to Londonderry. Unfortunately, whenever you travel into my part of the world, it's horse and cart, never mind the railway. So where are we going to go at that point?
Yeah, look, all of these are considerations that are given, and as we work with groups and providers, we will seek to protect in as far as we can as much of the service that currently exists, and yet try and make efficiencies as well, sensible efficiencies.
One of your major achievements must be the park and ride system that has been introduced quite widely in your tenure. Are there many more of those still?
Yeah, I think we've added some 2,000 spaces over recent years to park and ride. The latest was that at Dundonald. In terms of having an overall plan, and particularly to deal with congestion in areas, most especially I suppose around Belfast, then and other places, then park and ride is obviously a key feature moving forward.
Seems to be a better party going on outside. But
having more fun than we are.
And they seem to be. The last point in relation to TransLink, and I know there's been a lot of criticism of TransLink. Again, over your tenure, there has been a massive improvement in the actual rail system, and the number of trains, the number of buses, and the quality of that buses.
Absolutely, and in terms of the fleet, I think the fleet is in very, very high grade. We have Wi-Fi operating on many of the bus routes between many of our important destinations, and in terms of rail traffic, record numbers since not just the 60s but now the late 1950s. So that's again, that's when the glass is fuller than some of the half-glass stuff that we've been talking about earlier.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
It's interesting to note that even you recognise the increase in the rail figures. However, it's just part of the consultants who are doing the Corey and the Londonderry didn't recognise there's going to be an increase from the fixed railway line. David wanted in for a supplementary, I think. Just one, David.
I appreciate that. I'm sorry I had to go for a walk. Just trying to straighten my back. If no one mentioned this, Chairman, maybe I could ask, where is the department with the NIW, Northern Ireland Water pay increase? Is that included in your budget?
That's gone to, that's currently with DFP, and we're waiting.
We're responding to some of the queries they've raised with us.
Would that likely to be additional to your costs?
The money that's being provided to Northern Ireland Water is for them to run their business. It's not allocated specifically, so whatever pay increase is for them to manage that.
They would have to manage.
So can you tell me, Peter, when was that sent to DFP?
I think it was last week, maybe last week or the beginning of the week before, at the end of the week before. I can't remember the precise date.
So we stopped industrial action in January, and it took to the end of March almost before you sent it to DFP for approval.
There was quite a lengthy process to get the pay remits. It's more than one remit. It covers different groups of staff. The objective that I signalled to the trade unions was that we in DFP would work together to try to get a resolution by the end of March, and we're still trying to achieve that.
Okay, thank you, and I think that concludes that. Minister, today has been quite a long but friendly enough atmosphere, I have to say, and what's a fairly serious... Sorry, John.
Sorry, Chairperson. Just one question. Obviously, the whole thing's been taken up with how to balance the books. Minister, there's something like £2.5 million outstanding in non-paid parking fines. That's not the term we use, I know. What's been done about that? 1,224,665 in the last year alone.
How much does Stephen Nolan owe of that amount?
He probably
contributed
to it.
I think you're in better terms than I am with him, so you can have that.
There is a serious question. Sorry, members.
It's almost 3 million,
yeah. There's a serious question.
Over 3 years, Chairperson.
Yeah.
Because what it does say to those who are, there's people obviously do get penalty tickets and some pay, but when they see here others don't, doesn't seem to be an enforcement regime in that.
Well, I mean, unpaid bills from this executive is not a new feature, either in terms of rates or and other issues. We do strive to encourage prompt payment and also encourage payment full stop, and we'll continue to do that.
On relation to that one topic that John's raising now, Peter, maybe if you could give us a paper on that, just to tell us that current decision. But as I was saying, Minister, has been a serious debate. Understand, I mean, we do understand the difficulties you have, and every executive minister has in terms of the fiscal problems we have in Northern Ireland, and we do want to work with you in relation to that where we can and support you where we can. It is a serious debate, I have to say. Hopefully some of your colleagues won't be as jovial today as they were the last day they left in laughter when they left this last day when they're in your company, because it was a serious debate the last day also. So hopefully,
well, Chairman, I recognise the importance of the role of this committee. I think we'll accept that I have always afforded it proper respect and due consideration, and I look forward to continuing that relationship. And it might well be that after recess and after other excitements, if I'm still in post, we will take the opportunity to catch up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Members, do we just adjourn for a couple of minutes for comfort break, possibly?
Committee Room 21. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly.
Declan takes a seat. So we're on to Agenda Item 6, Departmental Briefing, the Safety Barrier Replacement Policy, and I refer members to page 91 of their pack. Advise members that the official will now brief the committee, and I'll welcome you back, Andrew, and you can give your presentation and we'll open it up to questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. I welcome the opportunity to be here. I know you felt there was some lack of clarity in the previous evidence that was given to you, and certainly
yes,
helped.
we had a fairly long session.
I hope I can resolve that and assist the committee in considering the issues surrounding this very tragic incident. I think there's a stark contrast with our last session, where we were looking at the overall funding of the department, to this session, which is coming in on a very small part of the department's work, but a very small part that has been linked to a very tragic incident, and I want to just recognise that at the very start. I don't actually have a formal presentation in the sense that you've already been taken through the sequence of events by the previous witnesses. But there are some things that I would like to say. You've heard from the people who have the expertise in this area and the people who were directly involved. And I was somewhat concerned to read that the committee felt that the previous witnesses were disingenuous and disrespectful. I watched the entire session, the record of the previous session, and that was not the impression that I got. So I must say at the outset, I have to agree to disagree with the committee in that respect. My view is that the witnesses did give honest evidence and that they were sincere in their approach. So I'd just like to record that. There has, as has already been said, considerable correspondence in that case, and while I'm here to clarify things, some of that may already have been clarified through the correspondence. In relation to the correspondence, we've already touched on the timeliness issue, and I would like to apologise for the fact that you didn't get all of your responses on time. In mitigation, there was a very extensive amount of work required in the department to get that information together for you, and we also wanted to ensure that our search of documentation was as wide as it possibly could be so that you got everything that you asked for, and I believe we've done that. The second issue is that there is an ongoing PSNI investigation into this case, and we didn't want to release anything, and in fact I don't want to say anything today that is going to jeopardise that in any way whatsoever, so I may seem a bit coy in my answers. I think it is possibly worth going through some of the timeline of this incident. I'll not go through it all because I know we're pressed for time, but the original barrier at this part of the Malone Road was erected in 1977. When we investigated this previously, we didn't know the full circumstances. We do now believe that the barrier was erected following an incident in which 2 passengers in a car were killed after the car left the road and struck a lamppost, which was at that stage at the curb rather than at the back of the footpath. We also know that the street lighting columns have been moved and are no longer at that position. So in fact, the reason why the barrier was erected, the obstacle that the barrier was erected to protect against, were removed some time ago. The barrier, however, did remain. It was inspected from time to time. We know that it was inspected in 2002. We know that it was also inspected in 2007. And importantly, between 2007 and 2011, the department's policy in relation to barriers was developed to quite an extent. And we had 3 new policy documents that came out during that 2007-2011 period. You've been listed in your packs. I'll not go through them in detail, but one of them was basically looking at the sort of barriers we provide. One was looking at how we manage existing barriers, and one was looking at how we prioritise sites for erecting new barriers. So quite a bit of development work carried out during that period. And following that, we had another inspection carried out in October 2011, in which the barrier was inspected and found to be in a hazardous condition. There was a further inspection carried out in 2013, and in 2014 the barrier was removed. That removal option took place on the 17th and 18th of September 2014. On the 15th of October 2014, we had the fatal collision in which a student tragically lost his life. There was no issue about our removal operation in that 1-month period. So we removed the barrier. There were no complaints about us removing the barrier. There was no concern raised about the removal of the barrier during that 1-month period, despite the fact that 20,000 vehicles a day travel up and down the Malone Road, perhaps 30,000 people. In fact, it wasn't until just before Christmas that we got some requests in from the media. And then in January, this committee corresponded with the department asking for some information. think the rest of the events are fairly well known. We've had a series of pieces of correspondence, which I've already apologised for the fact that we didn't get back to the committee on time. However, I believe you now have all of the correspondence that you have asked for. We also now know that, as well as the work of this committee, that the PSNI are carrying out an investigation. We also know that the Minister has asked for an independent investigation to be carried out on the policies that the Department officials have been using and whether they follow those policies correctly. And, of course, as this was a tragic fatality, we also know that there will be a coroner's court hearing at some stage. In concluding just my remarks before I open up for questions, I would like to say that there is a great deal of expertise in the Department in assessing existing barriers, assessing sites for new barriers. People have to make very difficult decisions. You know, they are life and death decisions. People have to install safety measures at places where they think they are going to do the most good. It doesn't always follow that they're right. We don't install barriers with the benefit of hindsight. They have very difficult decisions to make. I have gone through the correspondence, as I'm sure all of you have. I think the correspondence demonstrates that people did take a conscientious approach to this particular barrier, whether it would be removed or not, and whether indeed it would be replaced or not. I think the correspondence shows that, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have now.
Thank you, Andrew. So just you have said that to go back on the timeline, and I know that you said the removal option, that there was no complaints. Are you saying that and you still didn't know the reason the barrier was up in the first place? Did the reason not exist why it was put in the first place at the time of the accident when you took it down?
Yes. Just to clarify on that one, the assessment procedure that we use doesn't take account of the history of the barrier. It takes account of the current situation and whether the barrier is needed or not. So that's what was done. I know there is information in the file where the divisional manager has said, well, can you investigate why the barrier was there in the first place? And I think that's a reasonable challenge that he carried out.
Should those be guided by your procedures rather than anything else?
Sorry?
Shouldn't that be guided by your procedures?
Well, the staff had followed our procedures. In following their procedures, they recognised that this might be a controversial decision. It's generally controversial to move anything from the road network. The divisional manager was involved at that stage. He asked some questions just to make sure that no stone was unturned.
Yeah, but those would be engineering procedures?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, and you were just saying that there was no issue with the barrier, or even after the accident, until the media in January took it up.
Well, there was, yes, the first media thing was it was a couple of months after the accident, January, in October, and the media interest started just before Christmas. So yes, there was that period. No, people did become interested and did start asking questions after the collision occurred. Just after the collision occurred, the point I was making was that there was nothing before that.
But I'm actually going to bring all the members in at this point because I want to come back on a number of points myself. Andrew, Declan?
Chair, just based on the chronology that you referred to there, and I've looked through most of the pack, October 2011, the department deemed the barrier to be in hazard condition, and it was 3 years later before the barrier was removed. Why did it take 3 years, and why is it not removed and replaced?
Well, the two things are, just because something is hazardous doesn't mean to say that it's offering a serious risk to the public. So we would prioritise things that are identified as hazards, and if it's a serious hazard, we think there's an imminent danger to life and limb, we would act very quickly. But we would also have a long programme of things which would be to some degree hazardous, but not requiring urgent attention. So this was one of those things that didn't require urgent attention. Effectively, we're saying it wasn't doing that much harm, but it was.
And you said there's no complaints. Is that Would that be partly attributed to the fact that you didn't do a deal of consultation locally?
I don't think so. Where we have barriers, we would generally only consult with the people that are immediately in the vicinity of the barrier. All footways are busy. They all link to schools and universities and shops, and they're all busy footpaths. All lead to certain attractors of pedestrians. So it's normal that we would only correspond with one people immediately affected. The point I was making was that a large number of people will have passed that site, that have seen the barrier being removed, or they've seen that it have gone. It didn't strike anybody that we were leaving a dangerous position, the road in a dangerous condition.
I know the last meeting, that we were surprised that there only was one house in that sense contacted. I think it was just put through their doors, and the students at the end, the families weren't consulted about. We find that to be quite astonishing. That made account for complaints or concerns there was about it.
Well, that's our current policy doesn't require any wider consultation than that. The current policy is, however, being looked at as part of the independent investigation. So if the independent investigators find something wrong with that, they'll certainly be making a recommendation to us.
I should also say, Chair, that yes, whilst there was media attention on it, and there is obviously a lot of media attention, it wasn't just because of media attention that it's been raised at the committee.
Yeah.
I went to see a family and got their permission to raise it at the committee.
Right.
The first opportunity in the new year was the 7th of January, the first meeting back. We were back here, so we aren't just reacting to media attention. This is a widespread issue, and people are talking about it, So
no, I can fully understand the committee's concern with this, and I've unfortunately seen at first hand what it means to a family to lose a young adult. I know what it's like.
I think it goes without saying that impact on the community and the family is devastating.
Okay, then David.
Thank you. Just to establish where we are here, can we agree that the PSNI investigation is not focused on the removal of this barrier?
Yes.
You know, and we know that over 5 years the PSNI issued over 2,500 speeding tickets. Correct, isn't it? And when people didn't raise any comment to you or to your department when seeing the barrier being removed, would you agree that it's probably fair to say that they were thinking this barrier would be replaced?
Hard to second guess people. I wouldn't have thought so because the statement was properly written. That's a finished job.
So, what you're saying is that on the basis that nobody said anything, you didn't say anything, so that was just it. You just left it at that. That was fair enough as far as the department's policy was concerned.
Well, I believe the department's policy was correct, followed. That is being investigated, as indeed is the policy itself. It would be common.
It's strange if it was correct, Mr. Murray, in the manner in which you're saying, so correct, that anybody would think then we should have an inquiry into the correctness. I think the inquiry isn't into the correctness. The inquiry is into potential fault.
Yeah, you've seen the terms of reference of the inquiry. They are reviewing our policy documents and how we follow the policy.
Further to that, is it fair to say that prior to removing this barrier, the department did not conduct a risk assessment or traffic surveys or a footfall survey?
The policies that they stand.
But you're basing all your, sorry to interrupt you, but you're basing, so far anything, an emphasis on the fact that prior to the barrier being removed and after it there was no comment. Okay? In other words, nobody came forward. But is it fair to say that the department did not encourage any comment because it didn't conduct a risk assessment, didn't hold a traffic survey, or a footfall survey?
Let me just clarify. Our policies our two decisions were made in a linked manner. So when we decided that we were going to remove the current barrier, we then did an assessment to determine whether a new barrier should be provided or not. And those two decisions were made at the same time. We didn't wait to see whether there was any public reaction or not. We had decided at the point of removal that we were not going to replace the barrier.
Fair enough, but I understand that and don't want to dwell on it. But at the linked decision, remove and not replace, okay, you didn't ask anybody. You didn't conduct a risk assessment. And the reason I'm saying a risk assessment, I know you didn't conduct it. I know you didn't have any traffic surveys. And the footfall survey is perhaps a different light on this. But 2,500 people were given speeding tickets. And you don't seem to have considered that.
Well, if we should have considered that, our policy would have to be amended, and that is something that will come out from the...
Well, it might be the case that it will come out. You didn't know about 2,500 speeding tickets being issued when you were taking this decision, and had you known, then who knows what happened.
Road safety, I mean, is a combined effort between the engineering measures that are carried out by the department, the enforcement measures by the PSNI, and the education measures that are currently carried out by DOE. The speeding tickets are part of that triangle, and they're the part that tries to ensure that people stay within the speed limit.
Oh, so you did take into account the fact that there were 2,500 speeding tickets issued?
No, our current policy requires us to take the speed limit on the road. You've subsequently seen, and we've provided you with the actual speed surveys. You've seen that, but they're not part of it.
I know I've hit that barrier.
Yes,
when it was there. I do know about it. And I hope it won't be ending up where the ministers may be going and the two of us sharing a place. But no matter. Just finally, Deputy Chair, on behalf of the Department, Mr Murray, have you any regrets over moving this barrier?
That's an emotive question, and I'm answering these questions from an engineer perspective. I think I would rather wait until all of the evidence has come out from all of the investigations before I would make a comment of that nature.
Okay, well, finally,
there's a lot of information that we don't really know.
Okay, finally, on what you do know, do you believe that negligence could have been avoided?
Negligence by
the department?
On the basis of what I know, no. The barriers are not generally erected to protect pedestrians. That's not why that barrier was there. It's most unfortunate, not just, well, particularly for the family, that this incident happened shortly after the barrier was removed, but the barrier was not there to protect pedestrians.
What was it there for?
It was there to protect cars to prevent cars from driving into the street lighting columns that in the 1970s were at the edge of the footway.
People like me, if it hadn't have been there, I could have mounted that footpath. There could have been some poor unfortunate on the footpath, and I could have knocked him or her down. Is that not protecting the public?
Well, the thing about I don't know whether it's unfortunate you didn't have audio-visual facilities here, because I
have all the photos.
Well, there's a photograph I've got that you haven't got.
Oh.
There's one there which actually shows how a safety barrier operates when a vehicle crashes into it.
That's not the same type of barrier.
No, but it is the sort of barrier that we would erect now.
All right, so you're going to erect that one?
No, there's a couple more of those photographs there. Sorry about that. Safety barriers are designed to deflect and to direct an errant vehicle back onto the carriageway. That's what they're designed to do. They deflect considerably, and that photograph, which I've passed around, it's part of a movie sequence. That photograph is actually an ordinary car, as you can see, hitting the vehicle at a narrow angle. If that was a heavier vehicle, or if it was to hit at a steeper angle, that deflection would be much greater. So you can see why we don't use barriers of that nature to protect pedestrians. Pedestrians would not be protected by that.
Just finally, then, having seen this photograph, okay, what is the intention of the policy behind erecting a barrier such as this in terms of protection? Who or what are you protecting?
They're to protect motorists. Those are to protect motorists from roadside obstacles.
Even though they're on right abutted to a footpath?
Yes, because when...
Well, that one isn't, but the one we're talking about is.
Yes. When the barrier was erected on the Malone Road, there were street lighting columns out at the curb. And
Do you care more about the street lighting columns than you do about the public?
no, we don't care at all about the street lighting columns.
But that's the purpose you said they were erected?
In that respect, they're not to protect the columns. It's a very dangerous incident when a car travels side on and hits something like a tree or a street lighting column, because the head of the occupant tends to hit the side of the car. That's a very dangerous type of incident.
So just to wrap it up from my point of view, you're saying there was no negligence when this road had a history such as it has of speeding?
At present, I'm pointing out that there is an independent inquiry being carried out into whether our policies were appropriate and whether they were followed appropriately. There will also be a coroner's court at some stage.
Not so long ago, Mr. Murray, your colleagues, a more senior colleague to you, told this committee that there was no negligence, and the position adopted by the department prior to the holding of an inquiry was there was no negligence. So does that mean now that perhaps the jury's out and they're not admitting and they're not agreeing?
I'm simply recognising that this is being investigated. I have been through the papers in the same way as you have. I don't believe there was any negligence, but there's an independent review of that decision being carried out.
Right, Chair, thank you.
Just a point, Andrew, and you said barriers are not to protect pedestrians, but you still take in consideration whether schools and meeting places is when erecting barriers.
Generally, the barriers that are protected at schools are pedestrian barriers, and they're to stop pedestrians moving onto the road, and that's the more likely.
Yeah, we have in front of us the detailed inspection template, and those scores, and on that score is meeting places, schools, housing on it. So obviously, and that's the deal with the detailed inspection template.
I would like to come back to you on.
It's part of the report. It was the report going back to September the 24th, 2013. It's DEM 127 DEM report. So it does list those. Just another point I wanted to say in relation to the collision history, and it's a point that David brought up. And you do sit on the Road Safety Partnership Board, don't you?
Yes.
And you should have been aware that there was, it was a dangerous corner because of the number of speed tickets that were given out, the number of times that the barrier was hit. You should have been aware of that, being on that partnership board.
Well, we don't need to be on that panel for that. We share information with the PSNI, so we get all of their records of incidents where people have been killed or seriously injured. We have those. We use those to identify clusters, and we try to carry out engineering measures to alleviate those clusters.
So you knew that there was a collision history?
I don't know that there was a collision history at that side. No.
You ain't going to look at the flipping things. You're dented everywhere.
That's right. It's fatal collisions and areas where people have been seriously injured.
But I think somewhere around the report that your officials did record that there was a series of accidents there. Accident damage, yeah. Accident damage. Yeah.
Oh, yes, they have. There's minor accident damage. I think some of that was at the ends of the barrier. It might have been caused by reversing vehicles, which actually would indicate that the barrier was more of a hazard than it was actually doing any good.
Joe?
Yes, Chairman. Dr. Murray, what was the priority of the department and the immediate aftermath of the accident and the fatality?
Following an incident, particularly within the Greater Belfast area, we would generally carry out a joint inspection with the SNI. That would be to see if any roads-related feature had contributed to the incident, and if it had, we would consider remedial action.
And, John, can I ask, did the urgency of the priority change once the Minister met the family?
Up until the point that the Minister became involved, the decisions had been made purely on the basis of our policy and on the engineering assessments that had been made. When the Minister became involved, as he has really said, he took a wider view on this, and that process allows for that.
Do you take a wider view or a more rational, practical, common sense view?
Well, he did not go into the engineering assessment, if that's what you mean.
Are you saying he was in default of that engineering consideration?
No, the engineering assessment is purely that. It's a means by which we prioritise those areas for treatment where we think there's the biggest chance of saving accidents from happening.
And obviously the Minister met the family and then he consulted with you guys and he persuaded you gently or otherwise to get a barrier up.
Well,
are you happy with putting up a new barrier?
It's not the same sort of barrier. It's a high containment curve.
I know it's a high curve,
with a pedestrian fence.
but are you happy with having to put it up?
Yes. The Minister is the head of the department. We presented him with a number of options, and that's the one he selected.
He selected? I didn't know Danny Kennedy was an engineer.
Well, we give him the pros and cons of each option.
Finally, Chairman, what's the priority of the department officials now?
Well, we're going to wait to see. We've obviously got thousands of safety fences around the country.
I mean, relating to this particular site.
Particular site, the remedial work has started. The high containment curve work started yesterday. Priority is to get that finished and get it finished safely.
Thanks, John.
John?
Andrew, in an earlier presentation, we recall that you produced a document drawn up by road service consultants. Could you just go over again who these consultants are? Are they independent? Are they free from the influence of the department? Was that independent information which wasn't really just yourselves talking to each other?
Well, you could characterise it as ourselves talking to each other. What used to be called road service consultant.
That's what was on the sheet.
Yes, that's. As you know, we've gone through a rebranding exercise, and road service has become Transport NI, and road service consultancy has become design and consultancy services. So they are part of Transport NI. They're the engineering part of Transport NI. Basically, high engineering skills, but they act in they carry out work on behalf of the client, part of the organisation.
So, okay, they're consultants, but they're really just a branding name, really.
Yes, they're a branch of Transport NI that does the engineering work for.
Now, obviously, they must have some kind of criteria that they're applying. And which is that criteria influenced by road traffic conditions, say, some English suburban area, quite different from this semi-rural area that this barrier was removed from?
Well, it is influenced because we do work with other highway authorities across the UK to produce guidance. Now, we don't have to follow it letter by letter. We can tailor the guidance to suit Northern Ireland circumstances. And these DEM, these are Director of Engineering memoranda, these are the policy documents that we have used. They are basically to take national practice and apply it to Northern Ireland.
Andrew, do you not think if you'd used your own common sense, the barrier might not have been removed, rather than try and implement some criteria that might apply to Well, Fall Avenue in Corby or someplace that's completely different.
I'd have to say that incidents involving pedestrians and vehicles on footways are very, very rare. So, you know, if you were looking at a safety measure that you could introduce to save incidents happening, it would not be protecting pedestrians with a barrier along the side of the footway.
Okay, Cathal, I'll make it sharp.
Thanks, Chair.
Usually say that to me, Cal.
Chair, just the criteria thing is the critical issue here, because the demographics of areas change. And I say every elected member sitting around here has been lobbied for road safety measures prior to and in the aftermath, unfortunately, of many tragedies and stuff. So I'm just wondering, you know, this area here, one letter went to the neighbourhood. Now that neighbourhood, I know, my knowledge of it, actually, it's changed dramatically, probably since the 70s. So how often is that criteria actually actively looked at? That's basically what I'm saying.
Basically, once we put up a safety barrier, we will maintain it and it will stay there, and there isn't really a procedure for deciding whether we need to take it away or not, unless it comes into a poor condition, and that's when we would make that decision.
See the design. See in terms of the design feature, you know, how much has that changed since the time that?
Well, the design standards have changed enormously. We certainly don't use wooden barriers anymore.
Just one final question. Who's carrying out the review, independent review, Andrew?
It's going to an organisation called TRL. They have, they used to be called the Transport Research Laboratory. They were part of the government, but they're now a private company. They have a great deal of expertise in many areas of transport and highway engineering.
Okay, thanks for that. No doubt this is something that we'll be hearing more about later on after the review and the police inquiry has been carried out. So yes. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you very much, Sean.
Okay, folks, we'll move on. Item 7. QPA, NA, briefing structural maintenance. And I know the members have been very patient, and this is one of our longest meetings. Plus, the Justice Committee is here at 2. Right, I want to welcome you to the committee, man. Sorry about the long wait. It's one of those committee meetings. So, Gareth, Alford, Gordon Best, Mark Hall, and
Paul Brogan.
And Paul.
Right,
so, no doubt, Gordon, you're going to make a presentation and we'll open it up.
I'll maybe take 5 minutes, Chair, and just an introductory I want to call it a speech, but presentation on it, and then I'll hand over to yourselves for any questions, which I'll ask my colleagues to deliver directly, because they'll be able to give you a better indication of the impact of the cuts. So we greatly appreciate it. And first offer the apologies for Chairman John Shannon, who was here, but he's had to go on. Chairman, Vice Chair Clark, members, we greatly appreciate the opportunity you've given us to come before you today to highlight our serious concerns, disappointment and, yes, a fair degree of anger in relation to the imminent threat to, and I have to say, at least 200 highly skilled jobs within the roads maintenance industry across Northern Ireland. And I have to beg your forgiveness if I express a strong feeling of déjà vu, as our association has been in this position in front of the committee many times before. It is accepted that the condition of Northern Ireland's roads is of vital importance to the economic and social well-being of our country. We are an export-focused economy, and most of our manufacturing businesses depend on excellent connectivity with our ports and airports in order to transport their products quickly and efficiently to their customers. As identified in the 2010 Snaith report, plant maintenance of a proper magnitude is able to maintain a road network in a steady condition more cheaply than using reactive techniques or ultimately reconstruction. The report highlighted that when there is a decline in the condition of the road system and therefore an increasing rate of reactive patching, this creates an increased public liability claims and, most importantly, an increasing level of backlog maintenance. In the 2010 report, the level of backlog maintenance was estimated at £726 million, and Andrew Murray alluded to that earlier on there. And since then, we have only been maintaining the roads network to keep it as it is. Continued lack of funding for proper roads maintenance will only make this terrible situation worse, and if proper funding is not available now, this will indeed lead to an even worsening vicious downward spiral of even more money in the medium term to long term being spent on poor reactive maintenance and increasing claims. In the previous 3 years, the Executive has managed to allocate an appropriate level of funding to road resurfacing and maintenance of our most important asset. This is to be commended. The facts are that every £1 million spent on resurfacing activity supports 13 jobs within the industry. On small-scale and minor works projects, this employment ripple effect increases to 22 jobs per every £1 million spent. And indeed, it was mentioned earlier there that if every £1 spent below that threshold of the structural maintenance funding plan actually costs us £1.50. We believe that Transport NI's overdependence in the in-year monitoring rounds is a real threat to the development and maintenance of our transport infrastructure and needs urgently addressed. This is an urgent need. There is an urgent need to address the Transport NI dependency on the in-year monitoring rounds by starting each year with a higher indicative budget of somewhere between 80 and 90 million rather than the current 50 to 60 million. The Department's unpredictable and fluctuating budgets for road maintenance over decades has put the value for money at risk. Figures show that resurfacing is 20 times more efficient than reactive maintenance. Infrastructure UK actually state that savings of 10 to 20% are associated with certainty of funding. The threat to jobs and the safe condition of the £30 billion roads network has happened obviously because of the dramatic reduction in the Transport NI structural maintenance funding for the coming 2015-16 year. This coming year, Transport NI's maintenance budget will start at £22 million, some £108 million short of what is actually required. Over the past number of years, the budget for resurfacing of our roads has actually started in around £18 million and has depended on the in-year monitoring rounds to increase this to what is recommended by independent experts of approximately £80 million out of the total structural maintenance spend of £130. Confirmation that this year's resurfacing allocation will start at just £3.5 million has been met with disbelief within the industry. The magnitude of these cuts in what is essential maintenance to our roads network is totally disproportionate and will have a devastating implications for skilled jobs, the condition and safety of our roads network, and have wider ramifications for the economy as a whole. And I should add there, in particular, the rural economy and rural dwellers. You can clearly see from the information we have forwarded to you on the spreadsheets that the 2015-16 starting budget is so low it is hardly believable. Mr. Chairman, our members have businesses to run and responsibilities to employees whose families depend on their wages. The 2015-16 budget outcome for Transport NI goes against all recommended funding best practice. Indeed, ignores past positions held by this committee, particularly in relation to adoption and support of the 2010 Snaith report. The budgetary position also flies in the face of a number of Assembly motions that supported and urged the Executive to give appropriate allocations of funding for the maintenance of our roads network. And given the state of the public finances now, and undoubtedly for a few years to come, our Executive need to reconsider its position on revenue-raising powers for reinvestment in our infrastructure. These difficult issues need addressed and difficult decisions taken to ensure that we have a world-class road, water and sewage infrastructure. The Association is now asking serious questions of the wider Executive as to how such a drop in expenditure can be justified, given the clear view of the Assembly and the Executive Ministers in the past that funding to maintain our roads network should be a key priority. The questions that QPA are asking are, why has the Executive taken its eye off the ball in terms of the economic benefit of infrastructure maintenance and development? And what can the construction materials sector expect of workload from the Northern Ireland Executive over the next couple of years? Or do we, or those that can, focus on invest in exports and work outside Northern Ireland? Happy to take any questions. Defer to the colleagues.
Thanks, Gordon, for that. And then you've heard what the Minister said this morning. I don't think it's fairly dire in terms of the budget and funding, particularly from now to June. And he's only basing anything on hope after that. So he's also said he's prepared to meet us, which we would welcome. What would you, that's a question that's put to the Minister by my colleague, what would you expect to achieve out of that meeting, particularly after hearing what the dire funding position was?
Mark, do you want? Well, I think the one thing that we'd ask first is when will the money be on the ground after the 1st of April, so as we can get some degree of continuity of work.
About the $3.5 million?
The $3.5 million, exactly. Obviously, we would be encouraging them to turn over every stone within the department to look at where maybe other money can be found. But we all know, as was highlighted this morning, that money is few and far between. We all recognise that not only the department but the executive is in a difficult position, and certainly I think Mr. Little referred to it. I think there needs to be that discussion now of where alternative funding comes from. The Minister talked about seeking money from Europe. An interesting point was that and which causes us obviously some alarm, that if the department is actually sourcing that money, working hard to achieve it from Europe, that's handed back to DFP rather than to be utilised in the roads network. That is disappointing. So we would certainly, leaving the thorny issue of water charges aside, but we think, most of us travel to Dublin occasionally to go to the rugby or to Gaelic for a nice weekend in Dublin. We think nothing of throwing €1.90 into the toll at Drogheda, or if we're going to South Dublin, throwing €3 or paying it online for the e-flow around the M50 or not. So all those issues, we need to address, because we can't spend what we haven't got as a society, and if we want a world-class infrastructure, we're going to have to pay for it.
Yeah. Chairman, if I could just add to what Gordon has said, and just to put the 3.5 million, which is the initial allocation for resurfacing, and just to put that into real terms, 3.5 million is the allocation which is meant to last for April, May, and indeed into June. Now, when that is split down to what would be happening in our area, which is the Fermanagh area, that would give our company 1 week's work compared to last year when we had 3 months' work. That's the level of cutback that we're talking about now. Presently, because we didn't get the allocation that we expected in the January monitoring round, that's already resulted in. I have presently at least 15 employees who are on temporary layoff. We have made a number of redundancies, and we have even more people who are in short time at the minute. If things continue the way that they are at the minute, we are not a large company. We're a small, medium enterprise. It's a family company, and it's going to result in. We have estimated 22 company redundancies, and there'll probably be a further 24 subcontractors who will be affected. So that is the level of the effect to ourselves, and as well, like we have been. and again, I can only speak for our own company. Like, I also have looked at capital investment that we had planned over the next 6 months. We had over £1 million worth of capital investment planned. That work is now no longer going to proceed. That investment in new plant, new equipment, isn't going to happen. The other thing that we are looking at as a company, we are now looking at as Gordon said, we're looking at other avenues. We're looking at work in GB. We're presently established on the ground in GB, and if there isn't improvements to this budget for next year will be the first time where our turnover in GB has far exceeded our turnover in Northern Ireland, and that's what we never expected as a family company. And if this trend continues, I can actually see that our head office, there will be a real possibility that our head office will be moving out of Northern Ireland into GB. The consequences that come with that are that our workforce, who are based locally with families, won't want to travel to GB, and that will result in
Yeah, and I would know many of the people you're talking about yourself, Mark. I meet them every day and know the company. And just on that, I know you would do a lot of work down south too. And have you expanded? You have work down there as well, or is there a growth in the market down there?
The market in Southern Ireland is very much as it was. The work that we have been doing, for road service has been the mainstay of our company for the last 5, 10, 15.
And just so finally, just you remarked, Gordon, was that the executive needed to look at other revenue-raising powers. What are you hinting at, the corporation tax, or what ideas were you thinking of?
Well, as already been mentioned, water charges. One of the talking about potential tolling of roads, as they do in the south, that can go directly back into the maintenance of our roads network. One of the diagrams within the budget paper that jumped out at me was the level of household taxes that we have here in Northern Ireland. Sits at about £812. Wales is 1,613. Scotland's about 1,340. England about £1,400. If we want the costs, our household costs in Northern Ireland to stay as they are, then we have to accept there are ramifications for that. Now, I believe that the businesses have to obviously contribute as well, but we need to get serious. If we want a world-class infrastructure, we're going to have to pay for it. And indeed, I've heard that there may be moves from Europe to address the lack of investment in our water infrastructure, and maybe through infraction fines. I'm going to a meeting today of the Water Stakeholder Forum, and we're hearing obviously reports that Northern Ireland is going to fail its the 2015 Water Directive targets.
Okay, David.
Thank you. You're very, very welcome. And after the session we've had, you've heard it. You were sitting there listening. I'll come back to that in a minute. You talk of 200 jobs at risk. Is that a worst-case scenario that you're putting to us, or is that a current?
Well, if I could take that, David. I work for a company, John McQuillan Contracts. We're based in the Antrim and Down area.
Oh, well, yeah.
Familiar with the business. I did a quick check just yesterday on numbers of staff, numbers of operatives that were involved on road service contracts at the minute. Yesterday we had, between labour subcontractors, lorry drivers, people working in the quarry, office workers and engineers, 175 people working solely on road service contracts. Now, that's with the end of year spend. This year hasn't been as strong as in previous years.
That's your company?
That's our company alone. We could put another 30 people to that with demands we're getting for work to be completed by Easter. If I ask the question, what am I doing with those 175 people the week after Easter, there's £3.5 million there.
Well, I think we've got the picture. I'm going to say there's a constituency element to this too, because we get it in the neck because the roads are useless. And well, you heard what I said earlier on, but I do have a concern, Chairman, that what state are our roads going to be in 2 to 3 years' time? Well, I can't really be convinced that there are any plans to catch up. The other element that I wondered, have you an opinion on, is how much would the costs increase, say, from today, when the work isn't being done, until maybe 3 years' time? Is there a natural sort of scale the costs are going to increase by 10, 15, 20%?
No, there are some figures which I believe Gordon has, which would talk about you can maintain a road up to a certain point and with a certain level of remedial work required on it, but it then gets to a point where you can no longer bring that road back to life.
Yes.
And you move from a maintenance situation to a reconstruction situation. Now, the figures on that
They're probably about 5 times the cost.
It's about 5 times as the scale.
Yeah. And so, that other point that I made, I think Andrew actually referred to as well, I think it was mentioned within the Snaith report, which was written by an independent professional individual, where every £1 that we spend below that recommended level actually in the medium to longer term costs about £1.50. So it's the point that if you're not hitting that what's now the 130 million, you're actually adding to the backlog.
I think, Chairman, that we have a duty now to consider this perhaps in greater depth, and that what's been said is this issue of reconstruction. Are you able to provide the committee with some idea of basically what needs to be reconstructed? It's a devil of a job to get out of the department anything but I mean, at what stage does a road go from very bad to very worse, if you like?
Yeah.
At what stage does that happen? And how many of them do we have? And what kind of money are we in for? Do you have that?
Well,
it's in the report.
Snaith, both those, you can hold on to those, David.
Yeah.
Both those reports go into that
Okay.
sort of
Well,
detail.
I think we should look in depth at that. And I know time's running on, and it seems to me that where we're at is, in listening to the Minister, you in particular are expected to live from monitoring round to monitoring round. And I haven't been in business myself. I don't know how anybody would plan on that. But are you able to make sense of it? Are you able to plan around that?
No, I take that question.
What's your pick-up point?
I take that question because we look at budgets sometime in September for the following year, and we have to sort of project what we believe is going to be in the service budget for the following year, and we sort of make assumptions on that there. If we get 3 million, 3.5 million, there will be probably 50% down in turnover for next year. And 200 jobs, I think, are understatement. I think you're talking more than 500 jobs here, plus whatever subcontractors you have online.
Seriously?
It is a huge effect to the industry. And I know Mark said that we have 3.5 million that we take us through to June, but in reality, that 3.5 million is for the full 12 months. We have no idea what will be drip fed into us throughout the year. And as a business, it's possible to plan. And businesses are going to be looking to go further afield. Our sister company, Clarence.
Just quickly, how closely do the department work with you in maybe a hand-to-hand session of saying, look, this is what we've got, this is what we're maybe, it seemed to me this is how you work it, this is what we're maybe expecting in this monitoring round, what can you do with that, this is what we're expecting in the next monitoring round, and then we're at the end of a year again. How close do they work to help you plan?
They try to help us plan, but they'll not commit anything until they are told.
Fair enough.
Wow. So how do we plan ahead?
We meet quarterly. We have a liaison meeting that we meet quarterly with road service senior officials like Director of Consultancy and other staff as well. And this is how I'm able to produce the like of that spreadsheet, because obviously as an industry and an industry body and we're their private contractors, our members need to know what what the spend is going to be, both from a capital budget point of view and also a resource point of view, as Gareth has alluded to, so as you're able to plan. So we have a fairly ongoing close liaison with road service.
Just one final question. You were talking about the prospect of having to, and I think some other alluded to it as well, to look elsewhere for work across the water. If that was to happen, how quick can you address coming back? If there's an uplift, I mean, if you're committed out there, how quick can you come back? Is the labour readily available?
Well, one of the biggest problems is our resources are in our quarries, and our quarries are all based in Northern Ireland. How do you take a quarry and dump it in England or Gibraltar or Spain or anywhere you have there? It's impossible. You can take your labour resources, you can take some elements and plant, but you're going to have to buy materials and stuff and try and compete in markets that are very hard to compete.
I think it's important to add that we're not alone, and that's the one thing that's keeping our wider sector. We're talking about an individual sector here within the road maintenance sector, but in terms of the wider quarry product sector, 80% of the precast concrete that we're manufacturing at the minute is going into GB. Over 50% of concrete roof tiles is going into GB. If John Armstrong, Kieran Fox were sitting here from the Construction Employers Federation, they would tell you that 80% of the turnover of their top 20 contractors is based in GB. What Mark has alluded to, we're seeing more and more of our medium-sized, smaller companies having to lift up and move to Scotland, move to England, because I have figures here on the general construction spend for this year, and it's not good. This is going to be the lowest year wider construction spend for quite a public sector spend, I should say, for quite a considerable amount of time.
John? Sorry, just an answer to your question, David, regarding, let's call it a brain drain. I believe, literally, when they're gone, they're gone. And it is very difficult then to, and I'm not saying that everybody goes away over to GB, but people diversify. They go into other lines of business, and once they have gone on to another line of business, it's very difficult. We've found in the past to get them back into construction, and then it's extremely difficult to resource up if we ever had to resource up.
Chairperson, am I right in saying that your members have invested millions of pounds in new equipment, signed up to long-term loans, and all to improve the efficiency of the work you do? What then is your view of the stop-start currently using to fund the work you do?
Well, it makes it massively difficult for us in going forward in making business proposals. As you rightfully say, our industry is a very heavily capital-intensive industry. There are little bits of quarrying equipment that you aren't talking about hundreds of thousands of pounds when you make an investment. Certainly, if you're talking about investing in a new coating plant, you're talking £1.5 to £2 million for a very reasonably sized coating plant. But go to a bank with a proposal to look for financing for £1 million, £2 million for any sort of improvement around a quarry at the moment or in your business, and they're going to ask you, well, what's your forecast of work? Well, how can you forecast your workload when you're getting a drip-fed budget year on year?
Just very briefly, there's two things that will happen. Either some of your members will go to the wall, or yeah, I listened to you this morning, Gordon, on the radio, and that focused my attention on what I should have been doing, which was driving. And I concentrated on the surface of the M2, particularly as you come near Belfast. But there's other areas outside that on the lovely A6.
Don't mention the war.
Given the way that railways were neglected in the past and speed limits had to be imposed, is it beyond the bounds of reality that speed limits might well have to be imposed on roads, given the absolute failure to invest the maintenance.
Well, John, that is a likely outcome of a lack of spend. At the end of the day, it has happened in the past. I can recall on the A57 between Templepatrick and the airport, road service that put up signs a number of years ago with a speed limit and an uneven road service. I know on the M1 at one stage between Moira and Lurgan that happened. And at the end of the day, it's always noticeable if you do take the time to read the road services annual or the Transport NI's annual report. Historically, there's always been a paragraph in there written by the Chief Executive to highlight the corporate risk to the department of the lack of maintenance. And I think while we have made progress over the last number of years, particularly when the Giro d'Italia, for example, was coming here, the whole route was resurfaced and we did see a great improvement. I think this backward step and the uncertainty of funding is going to take us back to those bad times.
Just finally, given we talked about your members, we'd better not ignore your workers, who I think deserve commendation for what they do. Working out with their high-vis vests and all types of weather, working through the night so that we can't be inconvenienced. Is it fair that workers should be treated in a way that they don't know where they are 3 packets in the future?
Definitely not, John. This time of year, you're flat out. You're doing nights, weekends, you're working 5 days the normal week, and then you're going into April, May, June, and you're maybe bringing them back to maybe a 37, 39-hour week. And that's hardly enough money to pay their bills that they have, their electric, their fuel, their mortgage, whatever else they have. You know, it's so impossible for them guys to actually plan ahead themselves and actually think out how they're going to pay their bills. But unfortunately, they're not going to have jobs, and there'll be a lot of management will not have jobs because there'll be no work there first to be.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen, for the presentation there. Gordon, you're one of the more proactive lobbyists I know from behalf of your members, and you were saying at the start of the presentation, you said there that you have a sense of deja vu about all of this, and that certainly it's something that even since I came up here a few years ago, we have seen again and again. And you mentioned, of course, the situation in the south and how that was set up. Of course, all of the roads there, and I'm a regular visitor to Kerry, and I can drive from motorway from Ranostown basically to Limerick all the way, and those were all established under PPI arrangements, particularly in the south, whereby most of the money would have come in from Europe. And I think, you know, I was actually quite shocked there today when we looked at the pitching for the incoming year for the funding of 2.8 million from European capital resource, and I think 0.5 million in capital in force. And that, you know, that's a minuscule amount of money. And I'm just wondering what work can be done there in terms of that, because we had looked at we certainly looked in depth into the whole 10T provision, which is 60 billion over the entire EU, and how are we punching well below our weight in terms of trying to access some of that fund for the infrastructure projects, such as the A6. And I welcome this morning a small stretch of the A6 on the Benchine, which has been resurfaced for the first time in my living memory, but as not before time, because there was about in a 2-mile stretch, I'm sure there was 100 potholes like on either side. So I'm wondering, are we punching below our weight in terms of bidding for the European monies?
Well, I think if you look at the facts, compare sales with the public, yes, we are a region within a bigger economy, and maybe that has an impact, but certainly I have been out through the Assembly Business Trust on a number of occasions in Europe, and I remember the first time going out, and within about 2010, I certainly got the opinion that we weren't, as an executive office out there, we were punching well below our weight. Certainly, I know it's been mentioned today about the opportunities that lie ahead in terms of the A6, the Southern Relief Road around Newry, the York Street West Link junction. But you know, if you look at the strategic roads plan, we're only about halfway through that, and there's a lot of catching up to do with our neighbours and with GB. Like I get figures over regularly now from our parent organisation in London, given expected construction materials projections for England, Scotland, Wales. And like they're talking, 6, 7, 8% increases year on year for the next 3 years in asphalt and ready-mix concrete and aggregates. We're not looking at that here.
I had an AQ question some time ago. I don't remember what the answer for it was about injury and damage to vehicles and stuff from bad surfacing. Is there an argument there in terms of economics? Where's the critical mass there in terms of actually paying for injury damages as opposed to actually fixing?
5 million is the money set aside for compensation.
Yeah, I know that's what's set aside, but it's what was paid out. Actually,
3.8 million last year.
That's right. I'm just wondering, there's an argument. There's an argument in itself.
There's a clear correlation, I think, between we meet twice a year with roads or transport NI claims unit, and we've seen over the years where, certainly over the last 3 years, where the resurfacing has increased, and the ratio between resurfacing and patching has increased. That there's been a direct correlation with a reduction in public liability claims. So the information is there within the department to actually show that.
The information is with the department, but I think as well that report, that SNAPE report, is a must-read because it includes details of levels of public liability claims and probably would answer your question as to how what the way that trend was going at the time that report, and that trend will have worsened.
And I know, Chair, just finally, I know that you mentioned, Gordon, there is the precast concrete sector, and there's a lot of people from my neck of the woods there would be employed, people like Cray and McCreet and Higgins and all the rest of those guys who are delivering there. But most of their work is in Scotland and England.
That's right.
Yeah, I would, people that I know, I would say 80 or 90% of them are working across the water. I think figures like that need to be put into the public domain as well in terms of that, because if it wasn't for that uptake of the slack, we would be in deeper self-fear. So I think you should.
I think you only have to go to the Aldergrove or Belfast City Airport on a Sunday night or a Monday morning.
Thanks, Chair.
So are we bringing a whole lot of Poles and Lithuanians in here and sending all our own folk out?
Well, I want to thank you, man, because we're we're tight for time, and I want to thank you for coming along. Is that your clock, John?
Sorry, but somebody get me a
bucket of water.
Is the window open?
I think even my Acer's fed up.
Yeah, anyway, I want to thank you, and hopefully there's a lot of information today, and hopefully that meeting takes place between yourselves and the Minister and see what can be achieved. And you're right about the amount of stuff goes across.
Just before we leave it,
Pardon?
Just before we leave this subject, and not with people being here, but we haven't enough here to be taking any decision. But
we have if everybody stays.
Well, I would ask that that we would perhaps draft something for the next committee meeting, which would give an opinion that we have formed to the Minister about this. I think we need to lobby him. He asked today, for our help in things.
Yeah, and that's an idea.
We need to add weight to this.
I think David is right, and maybe that in the whole, the committee could bring a debate into the chamber on it.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah.
I think we need to advise the Minister, so long as the clerk doesn't get upset about what we're adding and adding to business. But, I mean, these people are good enough to come to us.
Yeah.
I've heard what they're... I'm shocked in many ways too.
I would maybe also want to extend, this isn't on the agenda, but maybe extend an invitation to the committee at some stage, maybe before summer recess, that if you do find the time in your busy diary, we'd be very happy to facilitate a visit to one of the nearby production plants to actually get an appreciation of what Paula said about that capital investment and indeed the training.
That would be very handy, because we're not allowed to get any more T-buns.
Well, I'm sure we can organise some very tasty sandwiches.
Okay, so thank you all. Okay. Members, get your attention. Item 8, EU matters. Unless anybody has anything to comment, we're going to move on from EU matters. Agenda 9, subordinate legislation, and every member has it in front of them. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Are members content?
Yep.
Agenda 10, Parkside Garden, Belfast, abandonment order. And again, are members content?
Yeah.
And Sleeve Do, Glen Road, Sleeve Do, View, Belfast, footpath abandonment order. Members, inform members of the department. Are members content? That this policy merits it.
Definitely.
Agenda item 12, water legislation implement European directive and regulation.
Oh, we need to have a discussion about that.
You can have it on your own. Are members content with the merits of the policy? Yeah. Item 13, proposed Derry Harbour order. Are members content with the merits of the
As long as
policy?
it's in London Derry Harbour, I'm not proposing anything for a Derry Harbour, that's for sure.
Any other business? No. We're back here next meeting, 10 a.m. On April the 15th. And thank you very much for being so patient.
Thank you. 21. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 21.